Welcome to my good bad brain. I'm a normal person, so I'm insane. I've got depression and ADHD, but I'm doing better since I medicated me. I'm still not always sure whether I exist or what being a person even really is, but I figured out a long time ago that being alive is beautiful.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to my Good Bad Brain. I'm recording this intro with other people in the room. There's Jason and Kyle. So this will be a brief one. This episode is the first episode of my Good Bad Brain in which we've had a mental health professional join us, which, you know, I know the whole point of this podcast has long been that everyone's an authority in their own experience, and I want to talk to regular people about regular stuff. But Dr. Nicholas Barr, Nick's been an acquaintance in my life for some time, so I guess maybe that's why it made it easy, because it was just somebody I kind of knew through that context, and it didn't seem that weird to talk to him. But also his specific area of study and treating people and whatnot is around trauma, especially like, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder in vets, like combat veterans and homeless youth populations, and people have been through some really hard things. And so I really wanted to sit down and talk to him about trauma, this idea, this word that gets thrown around a lot in culture these days, and that I use a lot and everyone uses a lot, and just talk to him about like what it means and you know, what constitutes quote unquote trauma, and some of the stuff that's in the DSM, and, you know, versus his personal opinions about, I don't know, dealing with that idea and our discomforts and our adverse conditions in our own lives. And it's a wonderful, this is like one of my favorite ones we've done. And I know I probably say that often, but I learned a lot. And, you know, when we, you know, obviously going into it, there's this barrier immediately. We're like, well, this guy talks about trauma in populations that have gone through real shit, like real tough shit, you know, the worst things you can imagine. I mean, homeless youth are definitely exposed to the worst possible conditions you could imagine, and a war zone is the worst possible condition you can imagine. So I think a thing happens a lot for some of us, me, I don't know about a lot of people probably though, that where you go like, well, I don't have real problems. My problems aren't there. That's not true. And basically, I mean, long story short, big surprise, doing that doesn't help you at all. You know, just telling yourself that your bad feelings don't make sense or aren't as bad as other people have does literally nothing to help fix them. And so I wanted to explore that with him and asked about that a lot, and he went into it. We talked a lot about stuff that kind of, I always think like the people who work at the highest and hardest levels of a certain thing always have something to teach us that'll help those of us who might have lower versions of that thing, you know? And just how like you can't even really say things are like lower or higher, and this idea that there's an objective reality is not real. That there is an empirical reality that we can agree on or talk about, but that an objective experience of reality is not something that anyone can ever say is a thing or not, and that your subjective experience as a person is incredibly valid always. It's real, and it's something you're going through, and that there are also things that can happen bad to you, traumas, that are out of your control, and they will affect you, and you didn't deserve it, but they happen to you, and that's sad, and that a kind of upsetting, unfair truth about that is that if you want to fix them, you are the only one who can, and that it will be your responsibility to do now, but that the hopeful thing at the end of that is that you can. And I think that's sort of like a beautiful, I don't know, that's kind of the nutshell, my biggest takeaway from the long conversation you're going to listen to now. But anyway, I'm not gonna introduce this one too long. I think I just want to get into it because it is a longer conversation. I've been kind of trying tighten up this pod, If you're enjoying My Good Bad Brain, check us out at patreon.com/mygoodbadbrain. That stuff is really, really dope. The people who support there, or just like write us a review and share us and tell your friends and things like that. The pod's hey, it's growing a little bit. Anyway, yeah, that's it. On with the show with my dear, amazing friend, Dr. Nicholas Barr. Let's do it. Bye.
That's the right trajectory.
All right, we are recording now, so anything you say is on the fucking record.
All right, cool.
Will you introduce yourself? I will say really quick that this is, for everybody listening, this is the first time I think I've had a true like mental health professional on here, which, I've always set out that this podcast, My Good Bad Brain, is like that we all have good bad brains, or at least those of us who listen, probably everybody. And I'm interested in people are authorities on experience and how people are getting through. But you have known on and off in sort of like strange coincidences for years, through physical spaces mostly. I think we met at CrossFit first, and we did some kickboxing together even at CrossFit, which was, I just say that because that came then from there, that combat sport. You showed up at the same jiu-jitsu gym I go to one day.
Well, you recommended it to me.
Was that how? What happened?
Yeah, that's how I found it.
Was it online or through Instagram or something?
Yeah, I think through Instagram.
All right, we'll kill it. So, well, I should have fucking realized that. But I've always liked you. I've always liked your vibe. We both were like motorcycle dudes for periods of time.
Yeah,
you
that's
still
right
are
too.
a motorcycle
Yeah.
dude. And anyway, you also, I'm going to let you talk about it now, but you also work in trauma a lot, which I think is also an interesting connection to the combat sports stuff, which anybody who listens to this podcast knows I'm always talking about jiu-jitsu for my mental health. But now, Nick, please go ahead and talk about who you are.
Okay, so I'm Dr. Nick Barr.
Doctor!
I know, it's weird to say,
It is
man.
weird.
Yeah, it's fucking weird for me too. So yeah, I have a PhD in social work, and primarily at this point in my life and career, I'm a researcher. So I study groups that are at high risk for traumatic experiences, like military veterans and homeless youth and young adults. Those are kind of the two populations I work most with. And I'm also a psychotherapist. And before I got my PhD, I was a full-time clinical social worker for the LA County Department of Mental Health, working again with groups at high risk for trauma. And my kind of clinical specialty was this treatment called dialectical behavior therapy, which is a mindfulness-based intervention for people with borderline personality disorder.
That does dialectics. Is that dialectical different than dialectics as a or is it related as like a political theory? You know what I mean?
It's not the point.
Isn't it like a Marxist thing, dialectics?
Yes, but the uniting thread is like, rather than taking like looking at issues in black and white, it's integrating extreme perspectives, essentially.
Got it. Because the idea is it's like things in dialogue with each other.
Exactly.
Okay. Gotcha.
Right.
Okay. No, please continue.
Yeah. So it would be something like, oftentimes what you'll see in that patient population is you'll see, like in an interpersonal relationship, somebody valued really highly in the beginning and then really devalued. So it's like, you're fucking amazing, I love hanging out with you. But then something happens and now you're a fucking piece of shit and I hate you.
So dialectical behavior would be like integrating those extremes.
Yeah, right. So can we validate the feel? Like, okay, let's try to validate your emotional experience around those points of view. But is there a way for us to like synthesize, okay, maybe in some context, I really feel good about you and you meet a lot of my needs, but then in another context, I feel really disappointed. And can we like arrive at a kind of integrated middle path way of looking at that?
That's interesting. That's a resonant pattern for me too, just as somebody who has ADHD. And as I learn more about ADHD, especially in adults, because I didn't get diagnosed till like a year ago. I always had a suspicion, but my dad was diagnosed with it and other things, and he took so many different medications that I think were like too much and overdone, and I was just so wary of it. But it has changed my life in positive ways. And reading about an ADHD pattern that exists in romantic relationships, they say that's common for the non-ADHD partner, is wondering like why during courtship they're so fucking in love with you and so like, oh, and then once you start dating or get married or whatever, that they kind of like turn into these like, they don't, if you can feel bad for the non-ADHD partner because they're like, they must not love me as much anymore. And it actually has to just do with a mechanism of like, how your dopamine works, basically.
Well,
and
stimulation by novelty is like where.
Well, because one of the things for me, it's been important to like learn basically in my relationships back and forth. We like, I guess, in dialectic kind of about it, that there's a way to communicate like, oh no, I still love you just as much. It doesn't occur to me to show you in certain ways. And it's not like, I think a lot of ADHD is difficult. For me, it's been because like things that we attach moral values to are actually not. They're like mechanical. For me, it's like mechanical. It's not like I don't care. It just doesn't occur to me. And that's hard. That's a nuanced thing to go like, no, I'm not an asshole. I'm just dumb. Or like, I just don't think about it. We're like, which I mean, I know kind of sounds like I'm an asshole, but anyway, trying to get better at that. But also your partner is like learning how to moderate their assumption about what things mean.
Yeah, right. I mean, and this kind of like loops back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, which is like emotion regulation. And that's really the core of that dialectical behavior therapy, DBT.
Is that the core, would you say, of like what you do in like sort of trauma studies in general?
Yeah. So
I've made that term up, by the way, trauma. You never said anything like I do trauma studies.
No,
but.
well, I mean, that's a good description for what I do.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, basically what I'm interested in is risk and protective factors for mental and behavioral health outcomes. So for example, like we talk a lot about trauma just kind of in, I don't know, it's like in the zeitgeist right now, but what kind of the more precise term is adverse experiences, because not everyone who has an adverse experiences goes on to have trauma symptoms, right?
Yeah.
So
is that just... Okay, I will say, let me just like bullet point some things that I think I'm hoping to cover in this maybe.
Yeah.
In an informal way, because I didn't like make a list or think about it, but whatever. That's my good. That's how I do this fucking thing.
Cool.
One is like, I would love to get into that. Yes, what you're starting to get on now. What is trauma? Because that is a word that's thrown around a lot. I throw it around a lot. I have a sort of understanding that I've associated with it.
Yeah.
But I like understanding what that is. That's one thing I'd like to talk about. And then I think why some people get post-trauma stress and some don't, and then ways to heal with it. Those are the big three things I guess I'm interested in. But so let's talk first about trauma. I throw trauma around a lot. I have a basic adverse experiences already helps to like make it understandable more, I think. And I guess also I kind of want to talk about this question. You use this word valid, and that's a word that I have an evolving relationship with.
It's very important to contextualize what we mean by that.
Yes. Okay. So let's do that. Let's say first, let's define trauma and define valid or validation.
Sure. Okay. So there are a couple ways to go, but let's start kind of with what the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, says about trauma. Well, actually, let me just back up a little bit. So there is, I think, maybe a misunderstanding that we have a very good idea of what trauma is and what PTSD is and how to treat it. And that is not supported by the research literature. We have an evolving understanding of trauma and PTSD. So for example, the most recent iteration of the DSM-5, which came out a couple of years ago, there's an entirely new symptom cluster of PTSD that wasn't there in the DSM-4. So in the DSM-4, the three symptom clusters of PTSD were hyperarousal, avoidance, and re-experiencing.
That's interesting, that word hyperarousal. Man, this is cool, because I do have a psychiatrist, but when we talk about it, like getting to talk to you in this way, almost like more as pals and stuff. Yeah. Hyper like and I'll try not to derail into personal experience too much, but ADHD, one of the things they say is emotional hyperarousal, this internal hyperarousal, and when I first read that, I felt like I fucking started crying when I read this like article about things, because I was like, I never felt like, sometimes it'll be a joke that I'm like a Labrador, but mostly it wasn't external hyperactivity factors. Sometimes I'm more often quite dazed and feel very distant and numb, and my experience of it is because inside everything is so fucking crazy. And when I read that emotional hyperarousal, so you're saying that
also makes a lot of sense what you're talking about.
What does?
The kind of depersonalized or dissociative processes in response to feeling overstimulated and overwhelmed.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually the fourth new PTSD criteria is this cognitive emotional numbing, almost like a depression symptom cluster. So that's just...
Tell me one more time. There was...
So hyperarousal, which is like that's the kind of traditional stereotype
Something really
of
fucking crazy
of a vet,
happens.
yeah, like jumping out of your skin when
Yeah.
you hear a noise behind you, just the body being in fight or flight.
Okay,
When
so these aren't initiating factors. These are like things that suggest you have a PTSD response.
These are symptoms.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Got it.
So hyperarousal would be like hypervigilance, like always being on guard.
Mm-hmm.
Re-experiencing would be things like intrusive thoughts or memories,
Got it.
or like smelling something.
Would that be the
having a-
quote unquote flashback?
Exactly
Okay.
right. Avoidance is could literally be trying not to go to places or be around situations that remind you of the trauma. So, for example,
Oh.
if you were mugged in a parking lot, not wanting to go to the grocery store and park, that would be an example.
Yeah.
Not wanting to go out at night, and then the cognitive emotional numbing is things
That's
like
the new fourth one.
correct. Yeah, those are things like depressed mood, tough time concentrating, feeling like things aren't real, or you're kind of swimming through the world underwater.
Getting freaked out because you're describing like my life. This, this basically the first and last one especially. I don't
Yeah.
really have. I don't think I have much of a. And I couldn't even. I mean, I have ideas. But anyway, keep going.
Well, so okay, so those are kind of the 4 symptom clusters. But again, that fourth one is new. So again, it reflects our evolving understanding. But with all DSM disorders, the other criteria is that these symptoms have to interfere with your life in terms of your relationships, your ability to
Yeah. Is that like
work.
that's like I always associated I did some like Al-Anon, and I've had friends in 12-step programs and stuff like that, and I've found them useful in the past, but I always went by that like Dr. Drew definition of addiction as like when it starts to like harm you and your relationships.
That is consistent with the DSM criteria.
Okay.
Right. You would
Of
you're
addiction.
technically wouldn't for every disorder, you would not be able to technically make a diagnosis if it didn't interfere with the person's life.
I feel like that's so tricky in our day
It's
and age,
very
especially in like
tricky.
capitalist societies, because like if you're if you have
Wall Street
compulsive
banker
behavior,
doing coke every day, making
exactly.
millions of dollars.
People are like, he's great, he's fine,
Right.
Which I think leads us to have like some of the politicians that we have, because they reflect the values of like so many Americans who think they're like fine, because like
Yeah.
our society is set up to like, I don't know. I think
Reward
reward,
sociopathy.
yeah, and like unwellness, and I even think there's something like, I don't know. I'm always thinking about this, and I'm sure you'll have thoughts about this because of who you work with. I mean, with soldiers and homeless youth, like trauma stuff. I'm sure you interact a lot with like aggression, and aggression is a protective instinct and that kind of a thing. But like this sort of like always grind mentality that like is popular in memes and whatever. And I'm always like, I'm
everyday parada.
Dude, yeah, everyday porrada. Yeah, that's exactly. That's that. I don't know. I'm the reason I'm saying I have a weird relationship with it, as I do find it useful. Again, jujitsu. Sometimes it's really. I do talk to myself in mean, coachy voices, like, "Come on, bitch, one more fucking rep," that kind of a thing, and it helps me.
Well, this is the dialectical piece.
Okay.
Right? Is that sometimes, to a certain extent, and it also connects. We'll kind of like loop this concept in if you want to talk about who gets PTSD and who doesn't.
Yes.
Is that there's a dialectic at work here, right? Because without some kind of stress and difficulty, it's unlikely that you'll perform very well. But if you're constantly under stress and in difficulty, it's also unlikely you'll perform very well.
Yeah.
So the question then is like, okay, how do we reach a dialectic there where we're stressed, we're pushing ourselves to perform, but we're also doing the self-care thing, right?
Does that, so I mean, because another thing about that I feel like is interesting to ask a question about, and I think this is something that I thought this earlier, that was a bullet point, I forgot to say it, was like mainstream medicine is fucking always way behind on nutrition, for instance. So like how long, I feel like still you get like this food pyramid, right, of like grains at the bottom and this whole thing that we know is not really very good for people. We know there were like political influence of why that happened.
Right. Maybe for some people and not for others.
Right. So exactly. My big thing is like everybody's different, but the idea that you would invalidate different science, you know what I mean? Because you're like, that's not the one I had. And just not just that, but like also the lack of preventative medicine, it feels like in the medical field. I'm just using that as an analogy, I guess, or an analogous sort of thing to the DSM and mental wellness studies. Like even that idea of like creating a dialectical where you're under stress, so you're performing, but also obviously if you have a job or something that's crucial for it, like a first responder or something like that,
Yes.
then that's necessary. But I feel like as a society, and maybe it's our puritanical roots, maybe it's just capitalism in general, like who knows, like, but that there is this, maybe it's just fucking Catholicism, I don't know, whatever. Christianity loves to exploit this thing, but that like unwellness, discomfort seems to have like a value of its own. And on the one hand, because I do have dreams and I want to whatever, I like moving forward and growth, and discomfort helps that, the carrot or the stick or whatever. But also part of me is like, why are we telling everybody that they have to fucking do anything? And this maybe gets to the question of what valid means. Like, to me, a big message I feel like I always want to communicate just to the individual human beings in my life is that they don't have to earn their space on this fucking planet. That like you are entitled, a word that feels dirty, to like space, respect, the breath that you have, to eat, to have medicine, if you want to get political, that like that. There's kind of so many people I know, especially successful people, have like this shame or something about existing. This like apology that you're taught from a young age that you have to fucking earn to have a space in this world. And especially I think when you get into like mental health stuff, where like some people just like don't function the same, or, you know, athletics, a lot of us don't feel bad that we're never going to be fucking some superstar, whatever, pick your sport and pick your favorite athlete, because we just do it for our own thing or whatever. But I still feel like this thing trickles down that like, I'm bad, I'm not enough. And anyway, that pressure to earn, I guess what I'm in my weird roundabout way is saying like, even that idea, how does the system feel? Like, I feel like often like a metric of if you're well or not is like, are you productive? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do, yeah. Absolutely.
And so like where does that question land with you and with the established academia of like, is that what we're trying to do, is make everybody productive, you know?
I think the word that most closely aligns with this concept that you're talking about is functionality. So we talk about whether someone is functional, but what that is a proxy for is like, okay, basically like a couple of domains, right? One would be like work. Are they able to work? So embedded in this notion of functionality is the idea that you should work and that you have to be able to work.
Yeah. And I do kind of go back and forth on that. I feel like, again, this is dialectic, I suppose, but like that I do kind of find in like my my whole fucking life, I feel like the samurai archetype is the thing that you aspire to, and that there is some virtue in work.
I mean, look, and even before, you know, the DSM is, you know, a product of, I guess, the current philosophy of science that we have, but this idea of not being able to be happy without work and love is a psychodynamic Freudian notion. I mean, like those are the two things: work and love. You know, and
that's really
I've
interesting.
actually not met anybody who is happy not feeling at all productive. You know, I've met people.
Oh, sorry, nitpicky. Will you just try to talk straight?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I might cut this part out, but probably not. I'm pretty slow. Anyway, not to interrupt you. I just want to sound good.
So I mean,
work and love.
Yeah. So it's possible to, I guess, to be happy without doing anything productive. I've just never met people like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get people who are like, "Fuck it, I don't want to do anything," but they're not really happy. You know.
I think that's true, and I it's weird though, because I feel like I meet people who need to learn how to dissociate their sense of value and worth from what they do or accomplish.
It's dialectics again. I mean, if your self-concept is totally contingent on your external validation from work performance and productivity, that's probably not great, you know?
Right.
But if your own work and productivity is either not there at all, or you feel totally devalued in that domain, it's difficult to imagine feeling happy. And it's similar with love. It doesn't have to be romantic or sexual love. It can be just friendships, you know, having a network of support. And again, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that those two things, even though we define them a little differently now, work and love, are really critical domains.
That sounds right to me. I saw this like I feel like it's really easy to get to be a documentary these days, you know, they're like, so it's like always take it with a grain or whatever. But also try to hear truth wherever you hear it. Who knows? But there was this documentary I saw a while ago called Happy, and the idea of it was they were trying. How do you feel about this? Do you know about this documentary?
You'll have to refresh my
All
memory.
right. Well, the broad stroke thing of it was like that I took away and I thought was really interesting was they were trying to find out like happiness quotients around the world and different countries and like what makes
Bhutan
different.
was like the
Yeah, I think but like the idea is like what's common to people who are happy and what what are there. And broad strokes of what I remember that really struck me were like one was something involving like physical, like adrenaline response, like that you do things that excite you and make you happy, that kind of thing. But another one that really struck me was multi-generational communities.
Yeah.
That being around old people and babies and people who are your own, and obviously I'm speaking from the perspective of like a 30-something, like vaguely youngish middle person still, but that there's something to that. And I have found, I think there's a weird thing going on in our culture these days. Like I have this roommate who I've lived with for like 3-4 years, but we've been friends for like 8 years. It's me and this other guy, and we're both straight guys. And sometimes I'm like, and we're in our 30s and we didn't have kids and we didn't do the thing that like our parents did. And, but part of it seems to be because like there is some function served in terms of like support and love by me and my buddy who like we cohabitate and we support each other. Yeah. And I think that there's something in these, maybe just more and more we're going to see it too. Like sort of, we were talking about my living situation, which is like I live in a 4-unit building and I'm upstairs with my best friend. My other best friend is downstairs and my brother's just moving in downstairs. But this kind of communal, and we have our private spaces. We don't have to like be in a farm room together. Right. And want to kill each other.
One yurt.
But that it like does create a kind of support that sometimes I'm like, is this why we haven't why we haven't entered into like quote unquote like normal monogamous long-term things already? You know what I mean? When people would pair off in their young 20s and start having kids otherwise. And I don't question it as a good or bad thing necessarily. I mean, I think it's good in terms of like the marriage thing, but like but what you were saying, there's different kinds of love and support that does feel like an important part to being happy. And that there's, and especially with men, I think in our culture, friendship and a theory that I've thought about a lot is that I feel like, and it's basically toxic masculinity, but like standard masculine, like the happiness that is available to you are two kinds. Are like, are you fuckable and are you rich? Yeah. And if you don't have like those two things, if people don't want to fuck you and you don't have a lot of money, which equals power basically, then you're a valueless man. And learning that there are other ways to feel love and value has been like, I don't know, important thing for me and I think in the world. But anyway, I've talked for a long time. Please respond to any of that. There wasn't a real question in there.
I mean, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? That those two domains are really important. And that those two domains are important for happiness, but that what that looks like practically evolves over time and in response to social conditions.
Oh, right? Well, actually, okay, so that actually, maybe that was the connection. Sometimes I have to decode my own thoughts. But work and love is like, in a perverted version, becomes rich and fuckable.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, those would be kind of the product of work and love. Right?
Yeah, but it seems like, I don't know, maybe there's something more important about deriving value from like the process and internal satisfaction and I don't know. I think also like being present for what you're actually experiencing versus like an aspirational.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is this, the options available to men, at least in our kind of contemporary social context, are limited. It's funny, there's like an observable increase in lifespan among men who are married, and part of why people think that's the case, not for women who are married, but for men. And part of the reason why scholars think that's the case is that when men get married, they then have access to women's social networks, and social networks are very protective, right? The density and quality of social connections is really important for health. Yeah. Like loneliness is as bad for your life expectancy as smoking cigarettes in some studies. So, I mean, it's very...
Yeah. I feel like you're also seeing some of that in the zeitgeist in internet culture with like the whole like incel thing and like just like the increase in like lone gunman thing.
It's a very interesting problem, I think. But yeah, so this is all to say that this social connection piece is critically important. So again, to kind of get back to this idea of functionality as a criteria for a diagnosis, if people are doing okay in work and love, even if they have some of these problems, I mean, that defines like a vast swath of society. Probably it's not until
Vast.
yeah,
Fucking vast.
it's like the whole pie, right? It's
Totally. And
not
I also think that thought continues, I guess, about the current iteration of work, and that's gonna fuck me up because that's such a simple binary to hang on to. But that even like the love thing, I was thinking about like how people I think, if you do the
connection,
apps,
meaning. I mean,
if you like do the apps, it does this weird commodifying of a whole human being where very quickly you switch. Like if you met those people in real life, like 90% of them you wouldn't go through them like that. You'd be demanded to be like, oh, and you'd be more interested because they're in front of you. But like it turns you into this thing of like nah, maybe nah.
Right. I can't wait until the first studies come out using. I mean, some of that data has been used just to see like who's most attractive to who, which is like very simple correlational studies. But it'll be very interesting to see how and if that affects relationship behaviors.
Yeah, like sense of like wellness or whatever.
And we don't know yet. Although there was a good study that came out recently showing that limiting your social media consumption to 10 minutes a day lowers depression and anxiety scores among college students. So.
I will say I purposefully disconnected Facebook for a while. I turned it back on, but I don't have it on my phone, so I barely check it. Yeah. And Twitter, I unfollowed everyone. I was like following the thousands of whatever, and I realized it was changing the way I think, like thinking in hot takes, thinking in reactionary ways instead of like and quickly aligning on the spectrum with similar opinions, polarized opinions.
I mean that's the thing, we just don't know yet how it structures cognition, because cognition used to be structured by, I mean, again, this is like, it's a little out of my
I know, but thanks for talking about it anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people don't know, but a lot of what scholars think may account for our big, powerful brains is the ability that evolved in the context of complicated social interaction. And you see this with primates, right? Yeah. So these complicated social interactions where you're observing behavior, you're responding to behavior, you're having to manage in your mind a bunch of complex relationships. Like now that
even just like tiny microfacial tics and things.
Exactly. And so now that we've outsourced a lot of our relationship management to software. I'm just curious what that does to our cognition.
Well,
we don't know yet.
I've thought about that a lot. I think like Werner Herzog was the first person I heard say like he believes that the invention, like the internet, is more significant than fire in many ways, like in terms of, or maybe the wheel, but like fundamentally shifting like the path of or as significant. And I kind of think he's right. Like the interconnectedness, like I believe will probably never, unless we just all decide to kill ourselves, but like we'll probably never see a war the same way like World War I and II were fought, because economies are so interconnected by the webs of the internet that like you would destroy the whole world economy if one major power failed completely. You know what I mean? Like firebombing
the oligarchs
Dresden or
make
whatever.
money in easier ways now, so they don't need to do that.
Right, exactly. That's so fucking good. I'm gonna steal that. Or like, but then also the way we're thinking, the way we interact with love, the way we interact with like our own belief about. Like, I think there's a big difference between a point of view and opinions. And like, there's like a lot of people thinking they have a point of view, regurgitating opinions and the cleverest version of the opinion that they saw and recalculating that into their own quote unquote version. And I don't know, it's weird to think that it's such a petri dish that like there's no like regulation or like what is this going to do to us? It's just here now. Like these fucking phones, which we're cyborgs now, basically. The way you just said we're outsourcing these processes to software.
Also
is
memory. We're outsourcing memory. I mean,
phone numbers.
Yeah.
That simply. I mean, even.
God, I'm going to mangle this, but there was like. In Thucydides, I think Pericles knows the names of the entire Athenian army, memorized all of those names. And fuck, I can't remember my own phone number half of the time,
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just fixing our levels while we
No, sure, yeah. So, but I mean, anyway, this is this notion of functioning, which is like a criteria for diagnosis in DSM. But what I think the takeaway is that we don't understand trauma that well. We don't really understand that well. I mean, we know what some risk and protective factors are, but it's very much still a topic under investigation.
Do you think related to that thing we're talking about with this way we're like rewiring our brains and interaction with the internet and stuff like that, and especially like a lot of people who listen to this, like we don't know each other in real life, but we have some kind of I have emotional connections to podcasting people, or they impact my life, the things that happen. I wonder how the virtual world like might be creating new adverse conditions also. Like this, like, can you have a traumatizing event in a like virtual way?
Okay, so why don't we talk about this? Because this is so I talked about those 4 symptom clusters of PTSD, the hyperarousal, re-experiencing, avoidance, and now this cognitive emotional numbing kind of depressive cluster. But criteria, so those are symptom criteria, but the criteria A is that you have to have had an adverse experience. Keep in mind, this is in DSM, and I don't subscribe to DSM as like the arbiter of truth in all things.
Gotcha.
It's useful to have knowledge of this, and it's important to have knowledge of it because it's like how insurance companies agree to fund treatment, et cetera, et cetera. But
got it.
But I think there are a lot of other ways to look at things. However, it is important to understand, I think, DSM criteria. But the criteria A is that you have to have had some experience where you felt as if your life was in danger, or the life of someone, you witnessed the life of someone else being in danger.
Is that like a mirror neuron thing? That like being so close to somebody else, you like experiencing it almost like as they do?
I mean, that's kind of beyond the thinking of DSM, but yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense to me. That you could that might be a mechanism in the brain of how closely observing someone else's experience could be problematic. So horror, like unmanageable, unregulatable emotion, horror, fear, shame, and disgust as a result of feeling that your own life is in danger, that someone else's is. Specifically in the DSM, it says criteria A cannot be witnessing something like watching a terrorist event on TV or cannot be. So that's kind of
interesting.
The core criteria. But then there's also this idea of vicarious trauma, which has received, there's a lot of controversy around this idea, but it's receiving more attention in the literature. Vicarious trauma is like what a therapist or caretaker experiences, hearing trauma narratives again and again.
Or I know some people, I have some family members that like work in like public defender's office and they see this fucking evidence all day and horrible, horrible shit.
And you know, I'm kind of to me, the jury's out. I mean, certainly people who,
well, I mean, there's like people who like write like YouTube or whatever. There's like people who like they've read articles,
watch horrible shit, or police officers who like are prosecuting child pornography.
That's what I mean. There's like people who have to sit
in
in a room and watch this shit all day long.
That's gonna fuck you up. It's gonna do something to you.
Yeah,
you know. And I know just for myself, there's only been a couple. I've seen a bunch of trauma patients, but there've been 1 or 2 trauma narratives that were very disturbing to me, and it's only times that I went home and couldn't sleep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But going through the treatment process with them, you know, the tiny discomfort in comparison to theirs that I felt went away as the treatment went on, as theirs did, you know.
Well, maybe that would, God, there's so many things. Everything's giving me like a million new thoughts, but I think that dovetails nicely into the idea of like validation.
Yeah. So that would be, to kind of wrap up those symptom criteria questions in the DSM issue. But when I talk about validation, like in the DBT context, the dialectical behavior therapy context, what I mean is to find something like somebody may
Can
feel...
I pause for a second?
Yeah.
Dialectical behavior therapy, that thing, is that just like when we talk about like talk therapy, is that generally that's what that's technically called?
So it's under
it's
under the larger umbrella of cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy.
Is that different than like when somebody says talk therapy?
It depends on what they mean by that. I mean, I don't like that term because I don't know what people mean. Some clinicians say, I just do talk therapy, but what that means is they don't really do anything. They kind of just do what they feel like. And I mean, this is a little bit of an aside, but I think that if you're doing okay and you just want someone to listen to your problems and kind of give you some feedback, cool, then just do, you know, whatever, if you like the therapist. But if someone comes in and
do you think that's a good thing to do? Or do you think it's like navel gazing?
I think it totally depends. It totally depends on the person.
Got it.
And how it affects their functioning.
Copy.
But I don't think that's responsible if someone comes in with a serious problem, like with PTSD. I don't think we know that just sitting and talking doesn't fix the problem. I mean, we know that.
Interesting.
So, yeah, we don't, you know.
Does it help?
Not really. I mean,
really, there
are 2 gold standards for PTSD treatment. They are prolonged exposure. I mean, there's a lot of controversy in this field too, and cognitive processing therapy, and there are some emerging other ones. There's some somatic kind of body-based that are very interesting, and they work well for people who have like one traumatic event, and one adverse experience that results in trauma symptoms and otherwise have a pretty like what we'd call a pretty good life. They work not well at all for example, military combat trauma. They just don't work that well.
Which ones were those? That's
prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy.
Combat.
EMDR is another one.
EMDRs, I learned some EMDR stuff that really fucking help me. But
a lot of people really like it because it doesn't force you to do re-experiencing, which is...
Oh, hey, dude, I'm doing a podcast. Miles? No, it's okay. Are you good? All right, sorry. We're going to go for like probably another hour. All right. Tops.
Dude, I'm enjoying this. Is fun for me. Usually people are falling asleep at this point, so I'm glad you're enjoying this.
This is extremely my shit. But EMDR, the basic shit I learned, like this bilateral stimulation tapping and these. I got some of these buzzers that are sometimes I'll put in my pockets that help calm me down.
Look, just like bottom line, I think people should do whatever helps them.
Yeah.
You know. So and you should try a bunch of things.
I think I liked it too because of what you're talking about. Like I had gone to therapy before, and I really like to have tools. Like even when I got physical therapy, we were talking about like your rib popping out, I have shoulder things. I only went to physical therapy like 1 day a week for 6 weeks, but it's because I'm very of the mindset of like show me things and I will go do them.
Right. Teach me to fish. So
and also having like a practical, I don't know. I do think self-taught. There's all these different things and tools, and I always say like use my tools, or I use my tools, or use your tools. But I think you got to figure out what your own tools are. And it's also, though, I think it's hard. It's nice to have a therapist who is a professional who actually gives me tools.
Well, here's the other piece. And again, this is dialectics. I think it's really important to trial and error test things that you want to do to improve yourself. And it's also really fucking important to consult experts. There is a reason why people develop expertise. And it's the product of a fuck ton of work and learning.
That makes sense.
So I think we need to respect both of those perspectives. And
I mean, bias coming from a part of the system, Mr. Doctor.
Totally.
Yeah, no, but sure.
But that being said, so I think like talk therapy.
I will say really quick, I was being a silly joke there. I do think there's like an anti-intellectualism that seems to accompany populism and nationalism when it's on the rise. That I don't mean to.
And I also don't think we should blindly trust experts because science is an evolving process, and things that people used to do something called debriefing after a traumatic experience, where they would immediately go into exposure right afterwards because we're like, oh, exposure is helpful. Yeah, that made people worse. So you know. That's why it's a dialectic.
I do think that's important to think about too. The idea of dialectics, I think when I first read about it as a political idea, I do think is really profound to think about in general, because just being able to wrap your head around like that extremes don't exist, and it's like seems to be like our simian brain who wants to say like on, off, white, black, and it's everything's just a quote unquote spectrum.
That's a much more efficient way for your brain to process stimuli. Good, bad.
Right. But it doesn't reflect reality, which is like that truly like it's this constantly flowing infinite factors that create reality.
And this is why these third wave psychotherapies that involve mindfulness incorporate this Buddhist, sorry to expose everyone to that, but they incorporate this.
Why is that?
Well, because it's like a secular therapy, but that's grown out of a Buddhist practice.
Yeah.
But
that's so funny. I don't know. That'll also get into the question of valid, but like this idea that like this way of thinking is, but this way of thinking is great. And since we've taken the exact same thing and called it this, now it's okay. But it is just Buddhism.
I know, right? This notion that there is not an inherent reality, that inherent reality is a convenient illusion that saves our brains a lot of expense.
Dude, that's crazy.
And but to get back to this idea of valid. So when I say valid, like in a DBT context, what I mean is finding something in what the person is saying that makes sense. Not that so for example, let's say I came over here and I was like, and let's imagine your car's parked out front and my car is parked behind it, and there's this big dent in the back of your bumper. Mm-hmm. And you're like, fuck, dude, you hit my car. And then you yell at me for a couple of minutes.
Right.
Okay. Well, your anger is valid. It makes sense that you're angry because you assumed that I hit your car. So your anger makes sense. Somebody fucking hit your car. You're angry about it. It makes sense.
Yeah.
But the collection of facts that you base that emotion on with respect to me is not valid because I didn't hit your car.
Right.
If I didn't, right? I
Right.
didn't hit your car. So I can validate your anger without necessarily validating the reality claim that it's
Right.
coming from. And so that's the critical piece, I
But
think.
that does seem like so crucial to progressing, that like if you don't validate the thing that's valid, they get hung up on that. And they're like, why are you telling me fucking my real experience? Like you
Yes.
said, there's no one reality.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. So it's learning how to validate someone's internal emotional experience and because it does make sense. Emotions. I mean, I'm an empiricist, so I think that observable reality has causes and conditions. This is also the Buddhist perspective, that there's nothing observable in the world that did not proceed from causes and conditions. Show me something, and we will be able to find the causes and conditions that led up to that event.
Are you that kind of like, I always just think of it like a billiards sort of theory of the universe, like the Big Bang happened and then physics just kind of like in all of its infinite, the dark matter physics that we can't understand yet,
Well,
that if you had a good enough computer, it would be the same reality again.
I don't know. I mean, I don't understand physics, so
All right, that's more of a philosophical question, I suppose.
well,
but like, do you know what I mean? Like that empiricist thing. Like you just said, there's no circumstance you can find that isn't preceded by causes and conditions.
I do believe that, but I also think that doesn't diminish the mystery and complexity of the universe. I think it adds to the mystery and complexity of the
Yes.
universe. I don't assume that just
agree.
because there are causes and conditions, we have the cognitive and sensory machinery to observe them. We may not. We may never
know.
be able to observe.
P.S. This is my argument for astrology.
Well, that's very LA.
It's very LA. I'm like, hey, motherfucker, the moon can make the tide happen, okay? So how do you know that cosmic bodies up there,
right.
micro gravities, aren't pulling on your DNA when your eggs are getting formed, and they decide who you are?
Well, it's possible, but then since the magnetic force of all the MRI machines in hospitals around
That's
us
right.
is probably stronger.
That too.
Yeah.
That's
But,
really funny. No, but I do think, I will say as a side note, I do make that stupid argument just to be an asshole sometimes. But I also think, to me, astrology functions just as like almost like Jungian. Like they're all just archetypes,
Well,
and it just makes you reflect.
look,
Is this thing in your life or not? You know what I mean?
I mean, I love storytelling. It's like the oldest human
Yes.
form of entertainment. And there are a lot of ways to understand truth other than the kind of scientific method way. And I love having those conversations and telling stories. You know, I think that's a
Yes.
fascinating way
I mean,
to
I think-
obliquely get at truth. My only problem
Yeah.
is like when someone tries to convince me of truth, let me know on what grounds we're talking truth. If you're talking
Right.
scientific truth, then we need to conform to the scientific method as we
Yes.
understand it. If you're talking about philosophical, emotional truth, then fuck yeah, all kinds of
Existential
other
truth.
avenues are open to us,
Yeah.
you know? And I feel like that distinction doesn't get made a lot.
That is so fucking. I don't know. I feel like this should be taught to us when we're in kindergarten, is how like validation can work and
Dude,
dialogue,
validation
you know?
is such a critical skill. Like anytime I work with anyone, no matter what their problem is, if
Yeah.
they have any interpersonal problems, and who doesn't, always teach the validation skill. I mean, there are many levels of validation, you know,
Right.
like to borrow the DBT kind of framework, but the most crucial one is just learning how to non-judgmentally observe what someone's saying. Don't get defensive about it, or even
That's
if you
so
do,
hard.
don't speak defensively. Figure out why it makes sense that the person is having that point of view, and just try to let them know that you understand that.
Yeah.
And then even if you disagree about the fact claims that's behind that, you can talk about that. But first, it's going to make you much more effective having that conversation.
Yeah.
If you just say, hey, look, I understand why you say that and feel that way. It makes sense. I don't agree necessarily, but it totally makes sense to me. It's valid to me why you have that perspective.
Well, I also feel like, especially in a politically this time in our country, and I think again we're not learning human, interaction as complex and an organic way.
Yeah.
That the increasing polarization between like on the political spectrum, but more like just the cultural spectrum, this sort of like weird blanket term identity politics that gets thrown around a lot, which like I think the definition of is like very elusive a little bit, but that like if we knew how valid works, like that idea of validity and validation, I don't know, I think you'd have a lot less of fake woke people who are just learning the
Dude.
language but don't actually care about making the world better, or
Yes.
and all these things, and grievances, because there's like this idea of like a grievance as like a point of view, I think exists on both sides of the political spectrum. In like the aggrieved like alt-right white guys, it's the same as like
Yeah, except without a historical context.
legit reason.
Yeah.
Of course, I didn't mean to like say not.
No,
but,
I know you.
But I think
I
that
know
the
you did,
emotional space that comes from prevents us from having any progress forward.
And look, it's real. I know people find it very distasteful to try to understand why points of view that they strongly disagree with make sense, and I get that.
I get that too, but I also have a strong feeling that like. I saw this dumb quote. I thought it was, it's cute, whatever. That like, I was like, my alarms went off and I haven't processed all of it yet, but like the Gracie University guys, they put a little thing up of like a women's self-defense thing. And their thing was like, I'm trained not because it's my responsibility, because it's my reality. And I'm like, okay, that's all right, fine. I'm not going to get into it. There's a lot to unpack there, but fine.
Right.
But like, but that, for me, identifying and understanding, empathizing even, and truly comprehending the points of view that you don't agree with, I do believe, like, you can say, like, men are canceled and toxic masculinity and white men, whatever, as long as you want, and I kind of agree, as a white straight man, I get it.
Sure.
But also, they will kill a lot of people. You know what I mean?
Well,
like, if we don't figure out how to, like...
Here's the bottom line to me. Like, again, I am an empiricist, and the bottom line...
So funny that sounds so close to imperialist every time you say it.
Oh, God,
like,
I'm not that.
Very different, very
that.
different.
Yeah, but...
I think your oligarch comment, sort of gives you up on that one. You're all right.
Real talk, dude. But the other piece is, like, the kind of core value for me in terms of, like, practice and dialogue is effectiveness.
Got it.
No one ever changed anyone's mind by yelling at them about how much of an idiot they were.
Right.
And very few people change their minds about deeply held beliefs by seeing facts that disconfirm them. That's not how most people change their mind. Even, scientists have a very hard time changing their, like,
yeah,
it's still noteworthy when someone builds and defends a theory their whole career, and then someone shows that it's wrong, and they say, "Oh, I was wrong."
Yes,
that's still, even in science, that's a very
rare.
Noteworthy thing.
Yeah,
people change their mind because they feel validated, understood, and connected emotionally, and you give them a safe avenue to integrate new information. That's how people change their mind.
Is that also is that correlative at all to like how you change your mind about your trauma?
It's how you change your
experiences around it?
It's how you, I wouldn't necessarily change your mind about trauma. It's how you change your relationship to those memories. You change your relationships, those memories, and the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that they influence by integrating that information in memory, in behavior, in different ways, in a place where you feel safe. I think that is the case.
Can you say it one more time? That you had a nice little quote. I just want to hear it again. Like you said, it was about validating your emotion or something.
Yeah. Well, the idea is that you can't change your mind about a deeply held idea or belief without feeling validated and safe to do that. And that
about where you're already at.
Yeah. That the person you're with is emotionally connected to you, validates and understands your perspective and your experience of reality.
Yeah.
That then opens,
and then it's like okay to
then
do
you
something
can integrate new information. Then you can practice new behaviors. But without that validation and sense of safety and emotional connection, it's just very unlikely. There are alternative pathways. We just don't really know about them because those aren't people coming to treatment, the ones who fucking figured it out for themselves. We don't hear about that.
That's so true. That's interesting because that's
here's the other piece, man. You ready for this? I think these numbers are probably low, but the highest estimates we have for PTSD among returning veterans of the most recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, OEF, OIF, is like 35%. That's the highest estimate. Now, let's say it's higher and it's 50%, which I think is probably high. That means half of people.
And this means that qualifies for PTSD that their function in work or love is like
would screen positive on a psychometric scale.
Got it.
Now I think 50% is way high. Okay, I think it's probably closer to 30%. That's what the consensus
One in
seems
three
to be. It
people,
could be
though.
lower. Some other studies show
one in
lower.
3 people is like a lot.
But even if half don't, that means fucking half of people exposed to getting their forward operating base mortared every night don't develop PTSD. What the fuck is going on with those people?
Yeah.
We don't know. I mean, we have some guesses. I think it's probably very robust emotion regulation skills, probably some like neurocognitive processes.
Is it possible though that like the thing we're talking about, like the Wall Street guy doing coke or whatever, that like there's just an acceptance of what's functional and normal and fine that's like kind of fucked up?
Undoubtedly, that captures part of those people, the walking wounded type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, another thing I was thinking about was like, can you have PTSD from committing terrible acts?
Yes.
And terrible, I don't mean to sound it so like morally, but like,
yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like on that On Killing book we talked about, like that it's the most anathema thing you can do is to take someone's life.
Yes.
As a,
what we see, at least in like, again, this is when I'm talking about the research literature, this is, statistics is the art of generalizing. So there are going to be individuals who are like, that's not my experience or that of people I know. And you're totally right. But in general, what we know from the statistical research is that killing an enemy in combat does not often result in PTSD. That's what you're trained to do. Now, it can. I'm not saying it can't. It's just that if you were to look at the combat experiences, like we can look at them on a scale and see the ones that are most predictive of PTSD symptomology. It's getting in firefights, seeing civilians killed, killing civilians, and seeing your friends killed and injured.
Oh, that's
now being in firefights entails being shot at. So that's fucking scary.
Yeah. But I mean,
now just to be clear, also, I am a civilian, so I've not had any of these experiences personally.
Yeah, you're speaking from the academia.
Right.
But has that been true historically? Like, I mean, that On Killing book suggested that like they'd say like 90, they said that they felt like there's something like 98% of people who kill someone have this like reaction that is you have to deal with somehow.
Well, so here's the other piece is that if you have all those PTSD symptoms and within 2 weeks of your adverse experience and then they go away, that's not PTSD, that's normal.
Got it.
It's only if they persist for longer than 2 weeks that we would give you something called an adjustment disorder. Potentially, or I'm blanking on the term, but it's not an adjustment disorder. There's basically like it's PTSD that hasn't gone on for a month.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of lower in severity.
Got it.
So this is all to say that it's normal to feel those symptoms for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But then for most people, they resolve.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So if you get in a terrible car accident,
the civilian stuff is like, I just think that's really profound. Because it kind of relates to the thing we were talking about before we started recording about like fight sports and like not feeling like I'll feel fucking awful if I see a video of somebody getting like, like knockout game or something like that. Someone not paying attention, getting
horrible.
cold cocked. Yeah. But I don't feel anything about seeing two guys like bleeding and smashing each other with elbows because, like you said, the difference between
Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier fight.
Dude. Like the difference between NASCAR and
that wasn't. Who was that? It was not Dustin Poirier. It was
I don't know.
But it was an amazing fight.
Yeah, but like what you were saying, that it's the difference between NASCAR and
speeding on the freeway,
which those videos make me so uncomfortable.
Consent and training. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that like a combatant is like you both have agreed, and which is like obviously imperialism and all the oligarch stuff, and like people don't ask you to come to their country and invade it and shit, but that there is some level of they're a combatant, I'm a combatant, we're trying to kill each other, versus like something in us that's like that's so fucking, I don't know. Did you see the movie Sicario?
The first one,
yeah. Because I'm sure we both have similar feelings. I really love the first one.
I haven't seen the second one.
The second one's fucking hilarious. It's just war porn. It's like somebody who saw it's like the people who made the first one and thought it was just an action movie about seeing operators be like whatever, and they just were like, let's just do that, and like none of the commentary.
Directed by Dan Bilzerian or something.
Yeah, it's hilarious. But like the I mean, it's a rip-roaring fun time, but
I will watch it.
Yeah,
for sure.
If you're into that, just sort of like action-y war porn. But the first one I think is like a really brilliant movie and has something to say. And one of the things that I think is like really interesting about it is this idea that there's that like war is almost something you opt into nowadays, and that like there's these DEA guys or the Delta guys, but they're operating like domestically and over the border, and like there's this scene that's really great in the first movie where they're like in the long line of people to cross the border in Tijuana and driving through, and this firefight happens between like these drug guys.
It's a crazy scene.
It's a crazy scene, and in that scene, I feel like that scene's so good, just like the first scene when they're driving through suburbia, and then there's this house full of like bodies. That it's like most of us are just living this normal life, and if you want to play the war game, you can just drop in and go through those agencies and do that thing, and then war will be in your life. But the surreality of like people in their cars right there who are just having a normal life. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. I mean, yes, I totally agree. I think the one caveat I have is that we know that like the combat arms specialties are, I mean, even though the military is a very diverse institution, the combat arms specialties typically do draw from younger people who are ethnic and racial minorities from low-income backgrounds. So, you know.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think one, the military can be a very good option. Career option. I mean, you can get an education, you can develop a career specialty, and if you're in like a small town and maybe you, I don't know, didn't do that well in school for a variety of reasons, that it can be like a very good avenue to get out. But they also target that demographic.
It seems, I don't know, I personally think, and I understand why, I get it, because whatever. But like, I personally think an all volunteer force is like kind of fucked up for a society. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like it creates this like warrior
Yeah.
class that's like, that seems like on a long enough timeline, that's how you get coups.
Yeah, I mean, I do think like our military, even though any large human institution is going to be full of problems, it's extraordinary to me how professional our military is. It's amazing, actually. Like the idea of having a military coup in America is, even today when a lot of our democratic institutions are under stress, still to me seems crazy. Like
that's great to hear.
It seems,
I mean, I've heard that from some other people who have said
beyond
like
the realm of possibility
that the people who are really truly at the top, who are running, like have a true belief in like their functionality as like a
I do just have to say
a protective institution
also,
of America.
Yes, I mean, I do just have to say because I do work with a lot of veterans, and one of the things I hear often from veterans is they're frustrated with the picture of veterans that gets painted in the media as like fucked up dudes with PTSD who flip out, and by far that is not the case.
Yeah, Jay said that, and
we have a bunch of veterans actually at Villains.
Yeah, who are dope, great guys, and I actually thought that I really appreciated him saying that, because the that guy who had shot people in Thousand Oaks had just happened.
Well, here's the thing: is that. Yes. So,
but I just want to say, I want to repeat what Jay said just while we're talking about it, that he was saying that in his experience, he actually feels safer and more trustworthy around veterans in general, because he finds them to be people who will show up and who truly believe in like serving people and putting themselves in a place to help others. And I think that was really valuable and important to hear. That, like,
I agree.
You know,
I mean, people who know how to be team players and get the job done. Even when it's hard. You know. So I think that's, the vast majority do very well, and those skills translate pretty well. However, it's extremely rare. Even though shootings are rare, even though they're much too common, they're still rare. This kind of lone gunman thing. The problem is that when someone has military training, they are vastly more effective at carrying those out. So, for example, the Dallas shooter who was targeting police officers, that was one guy, and they had to send in a remote control bomb. They killed that guy with an IED.
Really?
Yeah, they killed him with a bomb on a it's not a flying drone, but a fucking robot that they sent in. I mean,
I did not know that.
That's how they killed that guy. They couldn't go get him. This other guy,
they sure didn't publicize that very much, because I didn't know that, and that's a very scary thought of the killer, the robot thing. That's like, fuck, wow.
The other thing is this most recent Thousand Oaks shooter. This guy, I mean, he had a .45. Only one person who was shot survived. That's much lower rate than other people. So he knew what he was doing. He first targeted security, rolled in smoke grenades, and then took up a tactical position and shot the two people the first responders who came in.
Yeah.
That's not some incel neckbeard in his mom's basement getting a gun.
They had like a, wasn't there like a quote unquote good guy with a gun there too, who got killed by deputies?
No, that was a different scenario. It was a black guy, security guard with a gun, who was after subduing the
Oh, that's right. The
shooter,
right.
he was killed by police.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, where was the NRA on that one?
Anyway, this fucking country.
Yeah. So, but
I didn't mean to
anyway,
get off topic too much, but
yeah. So, but the upshot is that I think we were talking about this, for military combat trauma, these two kind of gold standard, I guess 3 if you count EMDR, interventions are just not that effective. So we need much more research.
Okay, so this is getting back to the quote unquote talk therapy, this colloquialism that's like, who the fuck knows what that means, versus like cognitive behavioral therapy would be this stuff that's like,
yeah, I mean, there's also evidence-based psychodynamic therapy. I would just say, if you're going to go to a therapist, you should ask them, hey, like, what's your orientation? Yeah. What do you do? What are you trained in? You know?
Yeah.
What's your kind of practice philosophy?
Right.
And if they're like, I'm eclectic, you know, if you're feeling okay and that's okay with you, cool. But they should be able to articulate some kind of practice philosophy.
Yeah.
And they should be able to explain to you why what they want to do with you is appropriate for your symptoms.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, you know.
Got it.
The problem is that there just isn't that much good stuff for this complex or combat related trauma. Like being exposed to a lot of trauma chronically over time.
And that's the homeless populations too. Homeless youth, you're saying that's a similar.
Yeah. I mean, they've not been in combat, but very often they've had childhood trauma or childhood sexual trauma, which is the number one predictor risk factor for PTSD.
Wow.
And then the problem is when you're...
Does it have to do the age at which you're exposed to trauma?
Yep. Age is a predictor. Also, when it's someone who you love and trust in the family, who's supposed to take care of you, like violates those rules and norms, and makes it very difficult then to develop trusting relationships, which we know are hugely protective, getting back to that work and love and social support idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, when someone's exposed, just to take an example, like if you grow up in a really violent, and again, this is not everybody, but if you grow up in a really violent household, you learn kind of apropos of what we were talking about earlier, oh, this is a problem-solving strategy.
Right.
And you also become desensitized to...
Oh, that was before we were recording, I think, right?
Yeah.
I'll just repeat that. I think that there is, what I said to Nick was that it occurred to me when I was younger that like the real bad, I mean, it's bad just to hit somebody. It's bad to hurt somebody. But also when you hit a kid, you teach them that that's an acceptable part of a social lexicon for solving problems or dealing with their feelings in the future. And that kind of gets passed forward in my estimation of things.
Now, you know, not always. Like, I mean, my dad and all his siblings got hit by their father, and I never, ever saw my dad raise his voice more than like this to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it just depends. But
I think that is true. That's maybe a really cool takeaway to reiterate. Not like, because as we focus on this stuff, and as this podcast always focuses on what's making us fucked up or whatever, but like that even that idea that combat veterans, that like 50% of them kind of like
probably more do well.
Probably more, probably as high as 70. You were saying like 30, 35 is the standard.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is like these numbers are from people who are getting treated at the VA. And by the way, there are 22 million military veterans.
Yeah, that's
a lot of people.
Well, what's active at any given moment? Like 3 million or something? 2.5 million?
I think it's like 1 million
that's
active duty, but then a bunch in reserve and National Guard components.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
But that is sort of a hopeful metric, I think, for everybody to be like your dad and probably a lot of our parents that like just didn't like that thing, and we're like, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I'm not going to do that.
People are resilient. The problem. Oh, this is the trauma. The problem though is that when that happens from a young age, not only do you have that trauma experience, but you're also at higher risk for experiencing subsequent trauma. Because like for me, where I didn't grow up in a violent household at all, if I see two people like, if I'm at like a party and shit starts to feel weird and like there's aggression and I'm seeing people start to be aggressive, I'm like, oh shit, this is bad news. I'm out of here. But if you grew up like that, you're like, fucking normal.
That's fucking interesting, because I think about that a lot, about like that there does seem to be some subconscious, almost psychic thing where like victims and victimizers find each other. Yeah. You know, in even just relationship dynamics, codependency and stuff like that.
Yeah. Right. And so
is that because of a like you were saying, like a modeling that's what you were comfortable with while you were forming, and so you repeat it?
I don't even think it's a cognitive. It's not like you make that decision. It's just like you don't recognize those fear and danger signals because they've been incorporated into your view of what's normal, because they literally were normal for you.
Right.
So.
So when in treating that kind of thing, is it like you were saying about like validating the experience, creating a safe environment, and then saying like, now can we say that wasn't normal?
The key, rather than saying that it's not normal, I think the key is, and this is why things are called third wave therapies, like these new iterations of cognitive behavior therapy, like dialectical behavior therapy, ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy is another one. They are mindfulness-based interventions, because mindfulness teaches you to observe your present moment thoughts, experience, emotions, and behavioral urges without judgment, with an attitude of acceptance. Not that you like it or you approve of it, just that you accept that it's your reality. Well, and let me just say,
please.
So the learning to observe and describe and accept the reality of your experience helps you to retool your brain to recognize those danger signals. Because now you're noticing, oh, what's happening in my body? Oh, okay, like my heart rate's going up a little bit. Palms are starting to sweat. Okay, what urges am I having? What emotions am I noticing?
That's so funny, because
that helps you reintegrate that information.
Yeah.
But without mindfulness, it's very difficult to do that. So
no, I was just, my therapist, you gave me two thoughts. One, I think Erin Robinson, I used to work with her as a host at this place, Clever, and she was on this podcast a while ago. And I had a really interesting discussion with her where she hasn't really had therapy or anything like that, but she's Christian, and she has like a relationship with Christianity and her God that means a lot to her. And but that the way she was describing mindfulness practices where like she's in a moment where she wants to say fucked up shit and whatever, and that she just checks in with God, and she's like, and I know that God wants me to be, so I kind of like, and I was like, that's so interesting to feel like you arrived at the same kind of thing by creating a metric of, I mean, in 12 step they say your higher power. It doesn't have to mean God. It can mean whatever you think it is. And then it was making me think about when I was in therapy, a profound moment for me early on in it was her asking me how I was feeling, like, how you doing, like casual, how you feeling? I think how you feeling was that, and just having a moment of being like, I'm like numb, like I couldn't even feel my body in a weird way. And that she started this mindfulness thing of like, I still do it sometimes where like when I ask that question, we're like, I feel the weight of gravity and pushing my butt into the chair and like, and just what, and starting
with the five senses, because that sense data is always available, even if you don't know what the fuck you're feeling. And that's very often the case for people with traumatic experiences, that they don't know what they're feeling. Is
there anything connection with that, you think, in like different compulsions that you use to deal, like the first one that popped in my mind was like eating, like emotionally, like eating or doing drugs, that you hijack your, five senses?
1000%.
Yeah.
Because your sense data is your tether to the present moment. Like,
is there any kind of like, are you doing it to like avoid feeling the thing that is you're really feeling?
Well, I think very often, I mean, like remember, one of those symptom criteria for PTSD is avoidance, behavioral and cognitive avoidance. So I think, show me someone who has a substance abuse problem and I'll show you someone who has anxiety or depression. I mean, it's almost never the case that people are doing that because they feel awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One of my dearest and oldest friends is he's 9 months sober right now. And I'm so inspired by his example because he has really done the hard work of confronting the underlying mental health problems that were provoking his use. And that shit is fucking, I mean,
hard.
It's hard. Like, he's gone deep, you know, and just exposed all these things that were so shameful and hard to talk about. And it takes an enormous amount of courage. And that is exposure. That is a level of exposure. You're forcing yourself, if you want to use like a more martial term, or allowing yourself, if you want to use a softer one, to really experience difficult and unpleasant emotions. And what happens when you do that, if you have tools, if you have coping, if you have no tools, I don't think you should do that. You should first learn some tools.
Oh, so that's interesting.
Yeah, it's contraindicated to take someone who's, for example, in DBT, suicidal and self-harming, and suddenly...
And DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy.
Yeah, people who have who are not coping well with their trauma experiences, and maybe they're coping with like substance abuse, self-harm behavior, and suddenly you do mindfulness with them or ask them to recount their trauma to you. That's contraindicated because they don't have the skills to manage those emotions yet. First, you have to learn how to self-regulate, probably with like some somatic or like breath-oriented physiological relaxation exercises. So you realize, okay, I can get back to baseline after thinking about this tough stuff. And then you have, as you were saying, like some tools in your toolkit to allow you to venture into more dangerous territory.
So when you're treating somebody who's experiencing, traumatic stress, or I don't know, I guess any kind, I would assume like adverse mental conditions in general, like you start there. You start with like, how can we manage the symptom that you're experiencing, offer you tools, and then move to
I would always
unpacking.
start with mindfulness and physiological relaxation skills training.
I'll personally say that like
Almost
since
always.
I think about I just say living in inquiry, and I try to like maintain that as opposed to like judgment, like going like this is like kind of staying like open to like what I'm experiencing. What is that? Why is that? What is that feeling?
Yes, but that's the critical piece of mindfulness too. There's also some emerging research literature to show that people with very developed mindfulness practices have had some really negative consequences where they feel depersonalized, increased anxiety. So I think
that's interesting.
So it's,
I mean, see that.
Yeah, that's emerging research. It's still very new. It's not as good yet because it's new.
Dialectical thing again too. Just everything's
right. I mean,
I have this joke that like any fucking conversation you're in, if you're not paying attention, you can just cut it and go, well, it's all about that balance. It's all about finding that balance.
Pretty much,
it'll always work.
Yeah, pretty much. But so I think for most people, mindfulness is very safe. You just don't want to go to extremes, but it's important to learn this from someone who has a practice.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, you can do it on your own. Like you can. There's lots of available tools on your own. I think it's probably one of the very safest things you can do on your own. It's unlikely that you can
that's
have
how I
these
think.
problems.
Like learning to like, you can even watch YouTube video and learn how to do some breathing stuff.
Yeah,
or like,
and that's totally
read a book.
Like progressive muscle relaxation, deep breathing, all this stuff is super safe. The critical piece with like a mindfulness practice is just the non-judgment component. If you are observing your thoughts, urges, and emotions and judging them, then you're teaching yourself how to ruminate, which is not good.
Oh.
So the non-judgment component is extremely important. It's an acceptance and validation of the reality of the moment, not a approval or disapproval. So if it's, for example, like let's say you experience something shitty like jealousy, right? Like someone you still care about, your ex, you see them out with someone, you feel jealous. Well, it doesn't mean that you like feeling that or you approve of it or you think you should feel it. It just means that that's the experience you're having right now.
And then you can kind of dictate your response to, not dictate your response, but like make choices about how you respond.
Then you can access your other tools to decide how you want to respond to that. But without the non-judgmental observation and acceptance of that reality, you're probably not going to be able to effectively deal with it. Oh, I shouldn't feel that. I'm not feeling it. I don't want to feel it.
I feel like you're much more likely to behave under its influence than too.
Yes, I would agree.
Like let it make choices for you.
Can I?
Yeah, let's take a little pause. Right. Yeah, of course. Thanks. All right, we're recording again. We took a little pee and water break.
Yeah.
This one's going a little long. Well, it's hard to say that. In my early days of this podcast, there's plenty of like 2.5 and 3 hour episodes and stuff like that. And I've been trying to like lock it down at more like hour and a half, be sort of like respect that humans have limitations or whatever.
Right.
Where do we leave off? Where do we,
Man, I think
where should we pick up? I was like, I could go into my like 6 quick cues with you, which I think I'll do with you anyway, even though, but,
yeah, wherever you want.
But I still think this is, I don't know. Did we talked about this is what I want to bring up. Okay, so we've talked a lot about, you've worked obviously with people who have been exposed to what by any accounts we'd qualify as like extreme versions of what would adverse conditions, trauma, adverse conditions.
Yes.
I'm curious about like, part of this is from my own experience and part of this is just, I think people like listening and the validation of, in that idea that like reality is subjective, that like even as an empiricist, that like mindfulness, I think, and those kind of like personally inquisitive processes are like, it doesn't, like if I'm like, I'll just say, okay, therapy, this is the thing. I had a moment in therapy at one of my first therapists who I don't think it was a very good therapy situation for me overall, just because of how I would, I think it's hard, especially as a young person or as a smart person or whatever, to like not feel like you're outsmarting them or like not really committing to the process, But But I do remember one day coming in really frustrated and being like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing this. I don't have any real problems. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, I just can recognize that I'm like a privileged person. I'm healthy. I'm smart. I'm just whatever. And I just can't fucking activate in my life. And it's just some days, it's most days, it's very hard just to breathe, but I don't have any like real problems. And then I think I ended on, some days it's just hard to breathe. And there's like this little pause. And then she was like, that's a real problem. And I just like cried, you know?
Totally.
So my question
which is valid, I mean, she validated you.
Yes. And that's, I think,
that's a high level of validation.
Want to get at is like, personally, I use the word trauma a lot. I describe, I think, relatively recent, I would say in the last like 5 years of my life, 4 years of my life, truly starting to think about these things and process how they've affected me or whatever, that I just call my traumas, and they kind of become abstract because I definitely don't have like a specific, like an attack or a thing, or like there was no like physical violence in my home. But there was like a general long-term, I think part of it was like parenting my parents and parenting my siblings early, incredible instability. My dad had drug addiction and mental breakdown, and got like to the point that he got disbarred, and like life was really weird during the divorce of my parents.
Did that happen like in front of you?
9 to like 15, 14, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And just like weird. Yeah. Some of it was like, definitely in retrospect, you're like, there were moments of, I guess this is my question. Nothing that like victim, you know what I mean? Like that I would put in the same category of like what people have experienced in war or homeless situations. I'll just try to wrap it up and then I'll let you, I'd just love to hear your response. My question is, for me and for other people out there, maybe for me, trauma has become almost abstract, and that I connect it sometimes to just like toxic shame, like something I feel born with or something, some sense of just like, I'm a bad thing in the universe. And that there is, and those feelings, which again, I got diagnosed with depression, you know, so maybe that's just a chemical thing, who knows? But that there is something that feels almost abstract that I think, like you said, that thing that witnessing a terrorist event or doesn't count, but like, I think a lot of people
seeing one on TV doesn't count.
Okay, but to me, so in the same thing though, for me is like,
what
about this weird, like, I don't know how to turn this into a cogent question. I know I keep thinking I'm going to wrap it up in the next few words, but my idea of just like validating and like what is real, that I know there's some big pain and some big pain and some big anger that I don't really know why.
Yes. Okay. So I think I'm with you. Let me see if I am responding.
Well, and I don't mean, this isn't a therapy session for me. I'm not going to be that uncomfortable for people or for you or whatever. But I think a lot of people have this thing, and I can't say this is why.
Yes.
Okay.
So let me see if I think I understand what you're. So let me kind of reflect back and see if I'm getting it. So what it sounds like to me, and I think you're right, this is a sentiment shared by, I think, many people, is like, fuck, I have there's some things that really cause me a lot of pain and problems and that are super difficult for me to deal with. But I can't say, oh, it's because I was raped, or it's because I was mugged, or it was because I was in combat.
Right.
But nevertheless, there are these fucking things that I'm having trouble dealing with.
And I think even like that, I guess I'd almost describe them as like environmental and chronic. Like it was like a time of life that was this way, which I do also think in our current day and age, a lot of people are having, whether it's like, I was just saying the other day to somebody, I was like, I don't know, maybe it's just because I went to the Twitter Explore page and it was like about this like a trans woman who died in ICE, custody, and who was, because she had complications of AIDS, because she was like trying to leave the place that she got raped by gang members, and global warming that nobody gives a fuck about, or Trump. And you're like, how, this impending doom feeling that I'm like, what do you do for that? For like everybody.
So, And so I think this kind of gets to the heart of why it's so difficult to talk about and to understand trauma-related mental and behavioral health symptoms and problems. And I almost think that, like, to me, in my own mind and when I'm working with people, I think like specificity and precision is really important, because otherwise we debate the utility of very vague terms. So if someone, like, when I talk to someone, I'm almost not interested in whether their experience meets DSM criteria of trauma. I'm interested in like what's going on and what have your experiences been like, and can you take me through, like, what do you think about? What comes into your mind when these problems come up? What enters your mind? What do you connect it back to? What are the processes and skills you're using to understand and manage those things? That to me is much more important and interesting than like, okay, well, does your particular experience meet this DSM criteria for like that? I don't care about that. You know what I mean? I don't find it interesting really. The only reason it's important is because it can help like point to which treatments are most effective. But as we've said, depending on who you are, these treatments may not be that effective. Yeah. So I think it's much more important to go.
You said something before we even started, actually. I think it was interesting, and that's a good place to insert it, about the placebo effect being the most reliable
effect in medicine.
Medicine. That like 50% of the time you can count on placebo effect.
Well, because placebo is not something made up. It's an actual endorphin response in the brain. Like when people, there's a study examining placebo effect as a painkiller for dental surgery. Okay. And
holy
people
shit.
And people who were in the placebo group. Not everyone is as good at using the placebo effect. That's a contorted way of saying it, but not everyone enjoys the same effect, placebo effect. But of the people who did enjoy the effect, there was a measurable increase in endorphin release in the brain. So it's not some fake thing that's happening.
I mean, that's just the craziest study to imagine. Like,
dude,
for dental pain.
Yeah, try getting that through your institutional review board. But it worked.
Anyway.
Anyway,
so treatment, that's just this idea that whatever you're like, we don't even know, like you said, specificity of what the instance was can help in terms of finding the appropriate treatment. But even then, like, not every treatment works for every person.
Right. Well, and so let me make another, so I think it's what you certainly don't want is to have clinicians or other people in your life invalidating your personal experience of pain because they don't think it meets the standard of severity that in their minds is required.
Yeah.
I mean, that is, if you are talking to someone like that about your experiences, you should probably not talk to them about it because they're not someone who's going to be able to validate you in an appropriate way. Remember, we talked about a sense of emotional safety, not physical safety, of course, but being able to feel emotionally safe and validated is like a prerequisite for changing growth. So
I feel like that's like one of those things that like, again, I don't have kids, but like that thing that makes your heart drop if you see a kid in public who's like, just in a, be like, and the parents are just like, shut up, does something where you're just like, that kid's going to take that the rest of his life. The sadness of seeing.
Yes. So but here's the other piece then is that validation and acceptance are necessary, but not sufficient criteria for recovery. So sometimes,
that's really important. I feel like you could repeat that a million times. Validation and acceptance are not criteria.
Are necessary, but not sufficient criteria.
Necessary, but not sufficient criteria.
Which is why I
feel like a lot of people stop there.
They do. And so the analogy that's an imperfect analogy that I like to use is like, okay, imagine there's a pothole outside your house and every time you fucking leave, you run over that pothole and blow a tire. Well, it's awesome when you finally figure out, oh my God, I'm blowing a tire every day because I keep running over this pothole. Yeah. Yes, that's excellent. Now you know that, but you have to fill the pothole. Otherwise you're going to keep hitting it. So,
well, I think that's hard for people to comprehend, even who believe in it. I believe, because the science of the mind is so dialectic that it's like, it's not the same thing as a pothole. We're going to solve this the pothole, I'll solve it by like putting concrete there or driving around it or whatever. But it's like hard to differentiate what you're doing as separate from acknowledging and processing and witnessing.
Yes.
And then whatever the other thing is to actually deal with it.
Here's another assumption that I steal from DBT that I think is very helpful. And then this assumption is like, your problems are real and it's very likely that you did not cause all of them.
And that's like that thing you said, like, do you think that's related to like reality has precedence
But here's the other part of that. It's very likely, so again, the first part is your problems are real and it's very likely that you didn't cause all of them. And at the same time, it's also very likely that you are going to be the be the one to fix them.
Yes. Which I feel like relates to that larger thing we were talking about getting in the mindset of people you disagree with, even like from a political sensibility.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
yeah, you know, that's how I think that a lot. Like, yeah, you don't fucking deserve to explain this thing to some idiot. You don't deserve to have to like put on you to be patient with things.
Right. Or to be constantly having to fight to have your experiences validated. That it sucks to have to do that. It feels awful. Yeah.
But I think the other flip side of that, especially with personal issues, is that it is empowering to know, like, it's validating to know that it's real. It's like a weird kind of validating and forgiving and like acceptancy kind of vibes to me to go like, and you didn't cause them, it's not your fault. And then also to know that like, and while it is unpleasant, that you are going to be the only one who, like, you will be, if you want it fixed, that you have to do it, the work to do it.
And you can get help, I think, but you're going to have to drive that. The lion's share of the work will belong to you.
But it is fucking lovely to know that you can.
And that's why the tools are so important. So I think, as you said, like a lot of people get stuck on that first part, which is like, wanting to be validated, wanting to be understood, or just doing that work themselves, like understanding and validating their own experiences, regardless of whether they rise to the DSM criteria of trauma or not. And I just want to reiterate, if something is causing you problems, that's real.
Yeah.
You don't need to have been in combat to have problems, and you shouldn't minimize your problems because they're not as extreme as someone else's.
Well, how is it going to help you fix them anyway?
Exactly. Again, coming back to my kind of like guiding principle of effectiveness, you know, like that is not going to be effective in helping you to live a happy life.
I think to myself sometimes I think about like, I do think this is part of why I think physical culture can be so helpful. Like strength training for me is something I think or athletics in general, but like I'll just use strength training because it's simple. Knowing I will never squat 1,000 pounds. That's not my physiology.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that if I can't squat 1,000 pounds, I can't get stronger.
Of course.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Totally.
So like that somebody might have horrible big traumas and they walk through it fine and deal with it their own way and they're okay. And I think it's all right to say like, just the way somebody who can squat 1,000 pounds will be able to carry a fuck ton of weight and be okay and you won't, like, you know what I mean? That it's not a moral problem. It's not a moral failing of like your emotional lack of worth or quality. It's just that like our organisms are all built differently.
And that's why I think if you part of this is, especially in treatment, reorienting your kind of values away from good or bad and should and shouldn't to effectiveness.
Oh, that's good. That's really good.
Who cares if you should feel the way you do after this experience? You do feel it, which is why the mindfulness component is so important. Non-judgmental acceptance of this is my experience. Fighting the reality of that experience and undermining yourself and devaluing yourself for failing some imaginary moral standard. How does that help you effectively cope with the problem? No one has ever shamed themselves out of feeling depressed or traumatized. No one has ever done that. And if you could do that, then I would be the first in line to shame you.
Yeah, I'm going to keep fucking trying, I guess, because it seems like I think I'll get it one of these days.
Yeah. And like,
that's so funny, though. That's really good.
Dude, and like so often I will say that to people because like my kind of therapeutic...
Everybody out there, please continue trying and let me know when it succeeds for you. Just continue shaming.
And
that's
you can write
funny.
that book, Shame Yourself Out of Depression. But
I think I did. I think the Catholics wrote one or two of those, probably.
That's a real institution we should try to emulate, right?
Yeah,
Jesus
absolutely.
Christ. Don't get me started, but
no pun intended. I think Jesus Christ would have issues with it. Actually, I think he'd be pretty fucking annoyed. I saw something recently, and it's some corny shit. But I don't know. I've kind of the way we're talking about narratives are powerful. I just think raised in a culture that's and a lot of the dominant like civilizations of the world are like based around Abrahamic faiths, whether they're Judaism, Islam or Christianity.
Yep.
But that like it does dictate a lot of things, but there was something that said something about like that when Jesus like saw his fate, that there's this other interpretation of like he didn't weep because he knew he was going to be crucified. He wept because of all of the billions and millions of people that would be murdered and raped and oppressed in his name for the rest of time. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to think about.
Yeah.
That like that there's a figure of this idea of the Christ consciousness that's been hijacked by like horrible, basically terrorist organizations. The Catholic Church is a terrorist organization.
Oh, it's a fucking pedophile cult right now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I mean, like back to the Crusades. I mean, they're just like they've done horrible things. Even if the Pope now seems like, I don't know, maybe he's a nice guy. Who knows? But my point is, they've done a lot of good things too. I don't want to like discount like. Well, in my experience, like I'm totally getting off on a tangent about religion. Community religious organizations can do wonderful things.
Yeah, it can be really protective. It's just anytime you have an institution that is made up of human beings that thinks they have a monopoly on truth, I think you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, I think there's something nice personally, and everybody can have their own thing, but I do love the idea of divinity. I think it's something that we share, that we have inside of us, something, that's just the word I like to use, like something holy, something like magical, that's something's like pure and precious and centered in love that we can nurture, you know?
I was a religion major undergrad, so
oh, wow. Yeah, dude, we could do this all fucking day. That's really funny. Right. Yeah, I don't know. I think that can be, I don't know, because I believe in that I believe in that in the most secular way you could believe in it.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I 100% do know what you mean.
Like, what is dark matter?
Yeah, like, because I think again it connects to this idea of community storytelling, making sense of the unknowable, which is by definition frightening.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there's like an inherent I don't know, I like to believe, but I don't think I even, it's like the good faith, bad faith existentialism thing. You come to the conclusion that nothing makes sense and it's all here by accident and there's no way to tell the meaning behind any of it. And does that make you think, so fuck it, I can do whatever I want, there's no rules? Or does that make you think, and that's why it's so beautiful and precious and we need to like be kind to each other and make this a good thing?
Right.
And it's weird to me. I don't know. Sometimes I do sort of believe in like quote unquote good and evil in the sense of like, what is your impulse around that realization?
Yeah, those are probably anchor points on the vast spectrum of morality, right?
Like, do you believe inherently that we should do our best to be good to each other, or do you believe in create less pain?
Well, again, I that's why I think this value of effectiveness is so profound and beautiful, even though it sounds almost like mechanical. I don't think it is, because that's like, I think a world like that would be better, right? So that seems like the most effective way for people to live in a happy and healthy way together, is to try to like be decent to each other. Yeah.
Including themselves.
Including themselves, man. Yeah. How can you validate and be kind to someone? I mean, find someone who's really bad at validating someone else, and I guarantee you they're not doing a very good job of validating their own experiences.
Hurt people.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like often the most difficult homework, is like, okay, now you've gotten good at like getting what you want interpersonally because you've learned how to validate people's experiences, and now like try validating your own internal experiences whenever you have that automatic shame thought, automatic like moralizing thought, shouldn't, etc.
I'm repeat it again. I'm trying to get it right this time, but that like validation and acceptance aren't enough. That like then you have to use tools, I guess, but just that the work, the demand of the work is on your shoulders. That, that's what it was. That you probably didn't even create the trauma. It's not your fault, this thing that happened to you, but it will be within your court to fix it. Yeah. But also that means that you can fix it.
Right. That's what's kind of the flip side of that's so wonderful, is like, yeah, if you didn't create your problems, that you still have to fix them, but you can fix them. That's right. I mean, and I don't want to look.
And I don't mean fix right to mean like there's bad and good and again moralizing, right?
Or that it's going to be easy. I mean, if no one wants to be unhappy, and if people knew how to be happy, they would fucking do that. You know what I mean? So it's not enough to just say, oh yeah, like you can fix it, so do it. No, sometimes you need a lot of help. Sometimes you need an enormous amount of help. So
on that, because that was the thought I had in the back of my head, I want to ask you near the end as we start to like wind this down for today, at least. I don't know. This is pretty fun. Yeah. Again, a thing in the zeitgeist, and I think I started this podcast a lot because of the sort of like zeitgeist feelings about mental health, which for me started with the idea of it like we've reached a phase where it seems easy for us to encourage and accept other people seeking help, but it's still hard to turn that on ourselves and go like, maybe me too. But on that same token, I was having a talk one day with a friend around the time Anthony Bourdain died, and and they said something that I thought was really insightful, and kind of like I'm keeping it vague about who it was, because I think it's not like the most correct politically thing to say, maybe,
Sure.
but that there's this thing in our culture of this will dovetail into a more specific question, but I think this is interesting, of like somebody kills themselves and it makes everybody sad, and suicide's in the news and we talk about it, and everybody goes like, please reach out, please ask for help, please tell somebody, don't suffer alone, we're all this thing, blah blah. And then 95% of the rest of the time it's like good vibes only, and like cut toxic people out of your life, people who are, you cut them out, and that kind of thing.
Yes.
And if you have that mentality generally, that doesn't feel very easy to say, hey, I think about killing myself because being alive is really hard.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about it? You know, in a culture that's like, you know what I'm saying? So like these mixed
Yes,
messages about
totally.
mental health. I guess the question I was going to ask, and you can respond to that part of it too, that nuance thing, but is truly, what should someone do to get help? Even me, I will say, for me, sliding scale therapy places really help me. But like, I have insurance, and I was trying to get psychiatric care, and it seemed so easy. Couldn't find a place to go. The places I wanted to go were like, we won't fucking, we'll give you medication, but you need to have a diagnosis first. We're not going to diagnose you. Wait lists for months long. You Yelp them, and they're atrocious. So if somebody wants help, like, and I agree with you, what you were saying, you need experts sometimes to help you with these tools. Don't just talk to somebody and, you know, debrief basically and redo the trauma on your own. What should someone do to get help?
Man, it's a really good question, and I'm going to give a bit of a lengthy answer, but the short answer is it is really difficult. Here's what our system is set up to do. It's set up to provide excellent care to people with a ton of money. So it's set up to provide, in some cases, pretty good care to people with no money. So again, my practice experience first was at LA County Department of Mental Health at a directly operated clinic serving a Medi-Cal population. So people who are paying zero.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the clinics vary in quality, although I do think DMH by and large is quite good. My clinic,
what's DMH?
Department of Mental Health,
Okay.
LA County Department of Mental Health.
Okay.
My clinic was excellent. I got excellent training. My supervisors were fantastic. We had really good patient outcomes. We were doing good work. Okay. This is where I got my DBT training. I got my CBT training there. I got my prolonged exposure training there. They were really an excellent clinic. And then I worked at a private practice in Beverly Hills, seeing the other side of the spectrum. People were paying $250 out of pocket. We didn't take any insurance. Okay. There's not a lot of good stuff in the middle is the problem.
Yeah.
So if you are working, doing okay, have insurance, it's very, very difficult. Practitioners don't want to take insurance because it's such a fucking nightmare to deal with insurance companies. You don't get
I know
reimbursed.
the person I go to now, I go like once a month to check in, and they help me.
You don't get reimbursed forever. They won't reimburse you for things other than specific diagnoses, DSM diagnoses, which again is why it's important to have knowledge of those.
Yeah.
So if you are, well, first of all, if you're suicidal, I do encourage you to call those hotlines. If you are really suicidal and you don't think you're going to stay safe, then I just have to say, I think you should go to the emergency room. You should call 911 and go to an emergency room, because one way to get connected into a system is if you are in a psych ER, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So if you really feel like you're not going to be able to keep yourself safe tonight, you need to go to the ER or call 911.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
But if it's not that level.
And I know I picked a very extreme example because I think about it a lot, but also
it's just incumbent on me that I have to say that.
Thank you for doing that. Yes, totally.
But the other piece is, man, you know, like if you have a good network, social network, like tap your network and tap your friends, to help you, because it's really, find someone who is like a really good friend who's willing to spend some hours sitting with you, calling a bunch of places, trying to make something work, who's willing to call your insurance company with you, because it's not easy. It's going to be labor.
Dude, that's real. That's good advice too, because I've never heard somebody say that. And it is true. I don't know how long I put off because I'd try the one call and be on hold, and you're like, fuck this.
It's going to take you hours. It's going to take you more time than it would take you to find a good mechanic. Okay. it's going to take
It's a lot more complicated than a fucking Saab.
You got that right. And that's not an easy car.
Yeah, totally. That's
Yeah,
so funny.
so-
That's the first. That's because my family had this Saab for years, and we just like fucking. It was the biggest nightmare. That's probably why I thought at first. Really funny.
Yeah. I mean, so look, get a couple of friends, buy them lunch, like let them know this is going to be a day. And it may be a couple days of working the phones, collecting information, really advocating for yourself too, using all of your interpersonal and social skills to advocate for yourself. If you are with like an HMO, like Kaiser, finding a patient advocate, they have a patient advocate there in Kaiser.
Yeah.
Any hospital
I will say
will
my
have.
and I got something through Covered California or something like that.
Yep.
They do have people like they have nurses on call, which I don't think are the same thing.
It's not.
But there's like I don't know. It was very strange because at first my reaction to and I have an HMO kind of a thing. Not like the best whatever, like my primary care physician's like a walk-in clinic,
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean the other piece is like you have to negotiate with your therapist, like for a sliding scale. Like, therapists are people. We're motivated to see people who we like and who we find interesting.
I mean, I credit some life-saving for sure to like the Southern California Counseling Center. I went to the Maple Center for a bit my first time.
Yep.
And then when I later came back, I think I just have sense memories and I'm just an emotional person.
Yeah.
But like I walked in there and I felt like a dog at the vet, and I was like,
Totally, man.
dude, it was scary as fuck. And sorry, it just comes back.
Yeah,
It was like kind of just beautiful too. It's like inspiring, It was like nice and human, like. But they were like, "You seem truly in crisis," and they got me in real fast.
Yeah, I mean,
Great, $25 a session.
Yes,
Exactly.
And
I was like, I could do that. I could figure that out.
yeah.
That's like I was spending way more than that on drinking every night.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing.
Anyway,
So
sorry
no,
that's.
I mean,
I'm not really sorry. I feel like you're
No,
used
dude,
to it, and
yeah,
this is who I am for
come on,
sure.
man. Yeah,
But
no need
but
to
anyway,
apo-
so sliding scale, you can negotiate with your own therapist.
yeah, do that.
Yeah.
I have a patient who lost their job, and I dropped their rate 30% because until they find another job. Because it's a little different. I do it because I want to keep doing it. I'm not really doing it.
Yeah.
I have another job. It's just something I want to keep doing.
Yeah.
So not everyone can do that. But don't be afraid to negotiate and advocate. The other thing is, I'm sorry that I'm having to say this because that's probably violating some ethics rules, but I think my higher ethical principles encourage me to say this. If you go to an LA County clinic, you can Google the one that's in your area. They're all over. It's difficult. You're going to have to wait in line. It's going to take time. You're going to have to go through a bunch of steps. But if you are not making any money and they don't check that, you will get in to be seen. And they often have good practitioners, including student practitioners who people don't often want to see, but their outcomes in large studies are pretty good. So because they're like enthusiastic,
Yeah.
So
That's LA County.
that's LA County.
Do other major cities have that? What if you're not near a major city?
Man, I'm afraid I don't know. I know that landscape in LA County better.
Yeah. Are there any online resources, or what do you think of these like apps about mental health and stuff, like where you can hook up with a therapist, like think over apps or something?
Yeah, I've seen them. I'm not aware of any research to support their effectiveness, although I imagine they're better than nothing.
Do you think it's really important to be in a room with a person?
Well, telehealth, there are telehealth studies and the outcomes are pretty good for like short-term therapy.
Okay.
So, but that's like video conferencing.
Yeah.
So
I think that I want to say the apps are like that too.
I think some do. I think there's tiers. One is a text and one is.
I've seen someone use the kind for regular doctors, and it's like kind of remarkable. You basically are FaceTiming with somebody, and they say, "Let me see your rash" or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think honestly, the like journey to wellness typically is not short.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to have to try different things. And I think that's worth a try. Again, it's effectiveness, So,
and I know, well, how about
if you're in crisis, I would not recommend that. I would go
the things, the apps sort of just go fucking
Yes.
Okay.
But I think that's a better option than nothing. And that may be enough for some people.
Yeah.
But again, here's the thing to be careful about is I don't think it's ethical practice to just be the person who's validating someone and watching them not work on any of their problems. Like
what do you do in that as a friend or something? If someone can't get through that step and you're like, you just keep doing stuff that you hurt yourself.
Some therapists do that. I am not willing to do that. So I will not, I don't think it's ethical for me to be the pressure release valve that allows people to not make changes in their life. You come to me once a week, you blow off enough steam to keep doing the same behaviors for another week until the pressure builds back up, and then you let it out with me. If I see that pattern developing and we call it out and we try to troubleshoot and I get buy-in to work on it and there's still no change, I don't think it's ethical for me to keep taking that person's money. So I'm going to try to refer them to someone else,
Yeah.
So I think, you have to be vigilant about that. Like, is that what the work that you're doing, are the same
with
patterns?
Yourself, vigilant with yourself.
Yeah. And with
am I feeling, is my function improving? Is this effective in making me feel better?
Yeah. I mean, I have another, one of my very best friends here. One of the things I admire about him is he's not gone to see a therapist, but he relentlessly works on himself through other practices, through other kind of through religion, other ritual, just self-improvement.
Well, that's a question that I would ask then also, maybe for people that aren't as in crisis, but also just for everybody. I used to do this more regularly. I would do a piece of practical advice, like something that worked for me, like something you could just do. What do you, I mean, I think you said before when we were off the air, we agree on physical stuff, but.
Well, dude, the thing that has kept me reasonably sane, I guess. Although certainly there are times when I.
But you're subjective. I mean, there's no reality, right? We can agree on.
Yeah, I mean, to me, behaviors like eating healthy food, trying to limit your mood-altering substances, and getting enough exercise. So sleep, diet, and exercise.
Truly.
Those are. Though I cannot emphasize enough how critical those are. And now it's very hard to do that. I mean, fuck, dude, it's super hard to get that stuff. Yeah, if you don't
have that habit. I think once you get into it, it's hard to not do it. It's harder to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but for me, it's not a question of motivation now. It's just a habit.
Right.
I mean, and I think I'm not the one to come up with that idea. Lots of people say this, RP strength, all these people say this stuff. But motivation is not going to be what sustains habits, healthy habits. It's great to have motivation, and if you have it, that's awesome. But what's going to sustain those habits is habit. Building habit and repetition over time. That's what sustains behavior change.
But that those basic, practical, physical things truly do.
Try to sweat for 20 minutes a day. If you can't do that, try to do 10 a couple times a week. Anything is better than nothing. Try to eat in a healthy way and try to get a reasonable amount of sleep. And if you are not feeling good, try to stay off mood-altering substances. Yes, there's evidence to show that psilocybin and
I was going to ask
DMA,
about that, yeah.
Yes, there's some very encouraging evidence to show that those can be helpful in a controlled environment.
Yeah, but see, that's what I think
with
is
therapists who are modern-day shamans, is continuation of that sort of thread throughout human history. I think those are very exciting and interesting. The total number of people they've been studied in is less than 20. Okay.
I saw that. Yeah.
So very encouraging. I'm a huge fan of that research. But I hear people being like, oh, I have a medical card to smoke weed for my PTSD. Okay, is that working? Is it?
Yeah.
If it's working, reluctantly, I might say okay.
I smoke weed and I had a medical one prior to
dude,
whatever.
I smoke weed every fucking day. But
yeah.
But
I
I'm
think
pretty
it definitely
healthy.
does help me manage some things. And I will say, I haven't drank this year. Still one time with Miles, two times. Once with Miles, that was a serious drinking thing because it was this event and this ritual. It felt good, and I didn't miss it. It was fine. Yeah. But then once one glass of wine in Chicago with my dad and my grandparents, and it was a horrible idea. It was just even just the one glass of wine, it was it's so corrosive and truly a depressant.
It is a central nervous system depressant.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And look,
but I mean, I don't know. Marijuana, for me, it does help me manage some things. Sometimes I have to pay attention to it because there are times I'm using it to escape. But generally, I like the way it. For me, it helps me engage with mindfulness. It helps me observe my experiences in less judgmental ways, look at them differently.
Yes, I agree, and it's different for everyone. Everyone responds to cannabinoids differently. Yeah. I mean, but again, here's the thing:
avoid them though if you feel that you're in a real.
Well, be your own. Imagine you're a Martian anthropologist and you know nothing about anything when you arrive here. Observe and describe your own experiences like that. And fearlessly try to evaluate whether they're helping or hurting you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. We have another neighbor. Not neighbor. This one lives here. Hey, Scardy. I'm finishing up a podcast. We're just talking about, good bad brains.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all good. You're on it now. We'll probably we've been going a little longer than I expected, but we'll probably wrap it up in the next 20.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So I think
Martian.
Martian anthropologist. So you have to like really, again, I don't mean to suggest that like I'm so good at doing this. I just think that like this is the good way to do it. Is to really evaluate whether things are helpful or harmful for you. Like I know there are times when I've used substances in a way that's not healthy.
Right.
So I think, look, bottom line is it's free to do this, which is to, it's not free, but it's cheaper than therapy, to try to eat in a healthy way, try to get some exercise, and try to sleep well. And the best way to do that, to sustain the habit when you're not motivated, is to fucking hang out with people that are doing that. Like we know that from research.
That
hang out
is
with
one of
people
those
who are gonna be like to call you up and be like, "Hey man, let's go for a walk. Let's go to the gym. Let's do whatever. Let's go to jiu-jitsu."
I think that like you're the average or whatever of people around you. Kind of like I do find that to be true. That if you're around people who are constantly like shooting down your attempts to improve your life, whatever that means, I think that's a real environmental factor, and it can make a difference being around people who are supportive one way or another and proactive.
And I've never experienced ever someone asking me, "Hey man, like I'm trying to get more healthy. Can I go to the gym with you?" Or like, "What do you eat?" I've never had someone ask me that question and thought, what's wrong with them? Everyone loves to
much
tell you.
Much more likely, I make them regret asking real
Of
quick.
course.
I'm like, well, let me tell you. Let's talk about this week. I'm doing keto.
Right. How many?
Whatever.
Right. How many hours do you have for me to?
Yeah.
So I think tapping your network again and trying to make some habit changes there can be really, really effective. Again, coming back to this effectiveness thing, but the mental health care system unfortunately does not do a good job of taking care of people in the middle, and you have to, similar to like our healthcare system in general, you need help to be your fiercest advocate, because look, man, that's what it's going to take. People are overworked. People are not calling you back. They need to remember your name,
Yeah.
So you're going to have to take hours to advocate for yourself, unfortunately.
Well, all right. I'm going to turn it on you a little bit. I think we'll just enter our little last phase. I think it'll be quicker than usual because, like I said, you're the first person I've had on who is a mental health professional, and dude, I fucking loved this. This was like...
This is so fun, man. Anytime.
I could do this. I was like, we just do a whole spin-off show. Like, just do a monthly check-in with Dr. Nick or something.
Yeah, anytime.
I'll try to actually remember them. I don't know why every time I get in the moment I can't remember. But I do the 6 quick cues, like little questions I like to ask at the end. The first one is always, what do you struggle with, basically? Have you been diagnosed with anything? I know most of this is in the interest in like destigmatizing or whatever.
Yeah.
But have you been diagnosed with any sort of mental stuff? And if not, like what would you say, like what's your personal history with your good bad brain?
Yeah. So I don't have a formal diagnosis. My family, we do have some like I guess genetic loading for depression in the family.
That's a good term, genetic loading.
Yeah. I mean, I know, and they wouldn't mind me saying, so I will. So my mom's been on antidepressants for probably 20 years. They've really helped her a lot. My sister, who's a physician, has been on and off antidepressant medication. She's an extremely knowledgeable consumer, obviously, of mental health services, so she can kind of manage that and uses it as needed, which is consistent with the research, actually. So
what do you mean?
I mean, antidepressants were not studied or developed to be long-term treatments, although they have been effective for some people, like
That's
my
good
mom.
to know.
But they were originally developed as relapse prevention tools following a major depressive episode, and that's what they're most robustly studied as a relapse prevention tool. So
that's good to know, because I sometimes the way I like to think about my medication use is like, because I've only used it for the last year of my life, is one of I think about it like using rubber bands to learn to do a pull-up.
Yeah.
You know, that like I'm hoping that I will eventually just.
And let me just say, I don't want to go out of my lane here. I'm not a psychiatrist, so if people
that.
have questions about medication, they should really talk to a psychiatrist. There's a lot of good information out there, but in consultation with a psychiatrist, I think people should not be afraid to talk about going off medication.
Yeah.
But, you have to have these other things in line. Is it a good time to go off medication when you're super fucking stressed, your diet's out of whack, you're not exercising, your sleep sucks? No, probably not.
Well, that's funny because I'm, not funny, haha. But for me, I found that the medications I took, which are, an amphetamine, an ADHD, Adderall, basically, and mirtazapine. This it's not an SSRI or an SNRI. It's a different kind of Remeron, I think is the main.
Oh yeah,
and antidepressant. I found a friend of mine described it the best way for himself with his experience with medication, saying that it just allowed him to use the tools that he developed. That like for me, it's been about I've been better able to form habits that are starting to really stick after the year or so of trying to put them in.
Yeah,
that I know if I do them, I'm overall feel better, and if I don't do them, I don't. Do you know what I mean? Like they were a bridge that just enabled me to start to put in some more permanent structures, I feel like.
I mean, again, I am like, I preach the gospel of effectiveness. If it is working,
that's so good.
If it is working, then you should do it.
I wanted to just reiterate, I think that very low key, you said genetic loading. I think that's a great way, because I usually I just say I have a history of stuff in my family. I've got all this, but I think just calling it genetic loading takes a lot more of the value off it. That like you are just it's something to be almost like being mindful about your subjective experiences.
Yeah.
Just being aware that you have the markers or the predisposition or the presence in your lineage, and not feeling like that's my legacy. You know what I mean? That's who I am out of my control.
I mean, these factors, even in twin studies, so people who share the same genetic material, like in schizophrenia twin studies, I think it's something like 50% of the variance is, or it might be a little more than that, but that's like you share the same fucking genes, and only less than all of the variance is explained by the genetic shared genetic heritage. So that means there's a ton of epigenetic environmental stuff going on.
Epigenetics, isn't it? My layman's understanding of epigenetics is like a genetic factor that turns on or off based on environmental stimulus.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Hell yeah, dude. All right. I pay attention sometimes.
Yeah. So, in terms of my own stuff, I've never had a huge amount of anxiety, although everyone has it. For me, it's much more like, I guess what you would consider more like depressive symptoms, like isolation behavior, shame and guilt, like not wanting to disclose vulnerabilities, needing to project this like, sort of like competence in all things.
So
did
being
that
a
come
man
through
in the Western civilization.
I think also,
America.
like my dad died when I was 21 and I didn't want to upset my mom. So I just like never talked about any problem I ever had ever again. Everything was always fine. So I think that's, part of that is kind of something I have to keep an eye on.
Well, the next question is always primarily focused on like what medications you may have tried or substances first, and then after that, like what helps you, like what therapies have you tried? And
so I've never been on any psychiatric medications, although I've certainly done a lot of drugs. I think
like all kinds of drugs.
I've done all the drugs except for amphetamine and heroin.
Got it.
Although, now what we call ecstasy is God knows what the fuck that is. Molly, ecstasy, unless you have a chem kit, we really don't know what's in it. But as people probably know, I mean, MDMA is methyldioxymethamphetamine, so it is an amphetamine derivative.
Yes. This is the most.
Melrose Place over here.
It's crazy. It's been 3 fucking times. It's amazing.
That's great.
Anyway, I might actually try to cut some of them out, but maybe not. It kind of creates a vibe.
Yeah, I dig it. It's a nice community here.
Yeah, it's really hilarious.
But look, I do smoke weed regularly. I don't drink that much. It just makes my body feel bad. I don't like how I feel. I hate being hungover.
Now that I've got, especially getting older. Really
I mean, I did obviously a lot more in college. Like the year after my dad died, I wasn't sober at all. But then I moved to India and lived in a the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics for 6 months, so that kind of dragged me out.
Oh, that's a life changer.
That's where I learned Buddhism. Yeah, it did.
Do you feel you practice Buddhism now?
I don't like when white people say they practice Buddhism, but I have a personal meditation practice that I do a more or less okay job with, depending on when it is in my life. And I think that the epistemology and ontology of the strain of Buddhism that I'm familiar with, which is Tibetan Buddhism, I find it to be, to me, logically unassailable. I mean, it is a system of philosophy.
Can you say epistemology and what was the other one you said?
Ontology.
In human terms.
Yeah. So ontology is like the kind of philosophy of how things are, like being.
Ontology is.
Yeah. And epistemology is philosophy of knowledge.
Got it.
So the way that knowledge is constructed and the way that knowledge is used to build a picture of reality, using the syllogism, which is like a series of logical propositions, right? If all birds have wings and a starling is a bird, then a starling has wings, right? So that's an Aristotelian. That is an Aristotelian syllogism.
Cool.
But the Buddhists invented their own syllogism, which includes an example. So,
what's the example of that one?
Oh man, it would be something like, if you can predict a cause from its consequences, and fire causes smoke, then by observing smoke, you can infer fire.
It's just almost like the other way around.
Yeah. If
That's
there are any
cool.
like geshes or like Buddhist studies PhDs out there that want to correct me on that, I'm
well, I mean,
to hear it.
you know, those words, like I used epistemological or whatever, ontological, and I feel like even I sometimes I'm like, well, I mean, kind of way I was like epigenetics, like I'll say that a lot, and I just want to make sure.
Yeah. So basically, it's like a way of understanding reality, which is ontology.
I just feel like I think the reason I'm pointing out is just like code switching or something, that there's like, I love language so much. It's like my favorite thing, like words and poems and my whole life, and nothing makes me madder than like grammar Nazis, like people want to get in the way of communication. And sometimes I think, like, on the one hand, yes, like academia and like a lot of vocabulary makes sense because you're looking for precision and like how can we describe things, but I don't like when it becomes like a barrier.
Dude, totally. Yeah, I think it's only useful when it advances understanding. It's not useful when it obfuscates understanding.
Right.
So basically what I like about what it really appeals to me about Buddhism, and what appealed to me so much when I was at the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics, was the logical rigor, like the logical rigor of that's demanded to reach and defend a conclusion. There's no soft thinking allowed. I mean, they really have the way they debate, like the way you get a Geshe degree, which is like in Tibetan Buddhism is the equivalent of like a PhD, although it takes much longer, is you read and memorize the entire canon of Tibetan Buddhist texts, and then you sit in front of a 3-judge panel, and they will throw out a proposition, and you have to quote the text that it's from and defend it while they attack it.
That's
from memory.
Wild.
In front of people. So, I mean, it demands this kind of facility with complex logical argument that I think, you know, apropos of our discussion of these devices we just don't have anymore. But anyway, it's so I definitely still smoke weed, but I'll tell you what, man, when I'm
after all that, so yeah, I still definitely smoke weed.
which my teachers would not have been thrilled about. But here's the thing, like when I'm not feeling good, I try to stop doing that stuff because it helps me get to sleep if I'm feeling a little, you know, worked up about things. Yeah. But the things that really help me are physical exercise, eating well, and getting to sleep. Honestly, those are the things that help me the most.
And your meditation practice, mindfulness.
I noticed the difference.
Yeah.
Big time.
All right. The third question is, what's something cheesy that you find inspiring?
Oh man, let's see. Dude, I read like a ton of science fiction. Like I'm a huge sci-fi.
Oh, I have a book for you then.
Nerd.
After this, I'll suggest that. You'll probably like it because we're probably similar a little bit.
Yeah. So I get inspired by like weird science fiction concepts.
Give me one.
Okay, so
same, but
okay, so like one series that I come back to over and over is Octavia Butler's oh God, I can't remember the name of the trilogy, but it's basically when the Oankali aliens come to Earth and like rescue humanity and kind of like retool their genetics a little bit. And they end up like requiring, in order for humans to procreate, the presence of one of the Oankali to be there. So like it turns all human partnerships into like these weird alien threesomes.
Oh, cool.
And
like
yeah,
that.
I just, yeah. And I think like my initial response to that is like, ugh, what? No, like that's not tentacles. What?
Oh, tentacles are involved now. Got it.
Yeah, there are tentacles. Yes. So, but I like feeling stuff like that. Like I like reading books where I have kind of this weird, visceral, unexamined response, you know?
Yeah.
So
you took that. It's not really like cheesy you find inspiring. It's like something that's like quote unquote like not academic or something, not like respectable quote unquote, but that you get true like valid experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it is cheesy. Like we were talking about combat sports earlier. Like I buy all the UFC pay-per-views. Like I fucking love that shit. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So that's
I
not
think that might count.
either.
I follow some fighters on Instagram and stuff like that who. The one I'm thinking of right now is like, it's weird, man. I'm sure you feel this way too. Like athletes and fighters, so many of them, like politically, I really disagree with much. I feel so like brainless sometimes, but like, there's things about their quality of being that is so inspiring.
Like Mike Perry, dude. Mike Perry cracks me up. He says some horrible
Mike
things.
Perry. I follow Mike Chandler.
He just got his arm snapped by Cowboy Cerrone.
Maybe he deserved it. I don't know. But
it was a great. I mean, talk about like a nice armbar from the guard.
Cerrone seems like okay from the limited stuff I've heard him talk about. But there's a guy like Mike Chandler, and there's like these videos of like there'll be like somebody talking over him while he's like inspiring shit, and I'm like, hell yeah, it gives me fired the fuck up.
Fuck yeah.
Just for the day, you know. The third one, which is kind of related, I guess, the fourth one rather. What's something dark about you? And, this is a little divulgy, I guess. But I always like it because we always stay in the light areas of people. And I think we all have dark shit in us. And you can decide. You don't have to be like crazy dark if you want.
Yeah. Well, this is like related to kind of, I think, what I was talking about earlier. It's very difficult for me to be like vulnerable. That's always been hard for me. So this is a hard question. I think if I can stay like a little bit oblique about things.
That's all right, yeah.
I think something that it's weird. I feel like, like all my professional life and career has been like in what's called in like a quote unquote helping profession, like trying to fucking help people. Yeah. But something I really don't like about myself is that I think I can sometimes be selfish, emotionally selfish.
You mean like in interpersonal relationships and stuff like that?
Yeah. And I think I give myself permission to do that sometimes tacitly because I'm like a good person because of my work.
Because you're doing good stuff elsewhere.
Yeah. And that's like...
Yeah, that's
really
interesting.
Well, I just think it's also really fucked up. You know, it's like such a bullshit excuse. So,
you're creating like a balance sheet for yourself that's like...
Yeah, well, it's just like doing the opposite of what I said we need to do to be healthy, which is to like fearlessly evaluate what's causing the problems.
That's very honest of you, yeah. Well, I wonder. I mean,
that's something
I'm
working on.
That's a tough idea too, though, especially in our culture. Again, like around the shame and stuff like that, where like I feel like some of things, especially if you're trying to help other people in your personal life, or they seem to have problems and they can't get past their like acceptance and validation phase. Where like I do think it's important. It's a new thing I've been learning about is like boundaries, and it's hard to sometimes figure out like where boundaries are and where selfishness is. You know what I'm saying?
It's very difficult, and boundaries are super fucking important for interpersonal relationships. And I think I started like too far on the no boundary side, like when I was just learning, and I
still struggle.
Yeah. Well, I don't so much anymore. Okay. I mean, I think I went too far on the other side. Yeah. In some cases.
I don't know. Sometimes you have to in the scheme of like tacking,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, very often that's like the way learning happens, right? Is you go from one extreme, then you go all the way to the other, and then eventually you move towards like the synthesis. Yeah. But yeah, that's something I don't like about myself that I'm working on. Yeah.
What's the last gorgeous thing you saw?
My ex-girlfriend, man.
Really?
Yeah.
That's the answer?
Real
Dude,
talk.
I love that you go from like, I really have difficulty opening up to like, that's so honest.
I mean,
Beautiful,
it sucks,
though.
but that's real. Yeah.
We don't have to get that into that. How long, when did you guys break up? Was it like recent? Or is it just like, it hurts?
It's pretty recent. Yeah, pretty recent.
I'm sorry, man.
No, it's okay.
I didn't know that.
I saw her recently, so that's okay.
I try not to make these like therapy. They've
it's
always
all
been
right.
discussions for people, so I don't mean to dig in. But that's kind of dope. I
To-
think that's
to-
also cool. It's very poetic.
Well, that's real, man. But also that Donald Cerrone armbar from guard was pretty beautiful too.
It's like either my ex-girlfriend or this guy gets his fucking arm ripped off. I appreciate that more than I could ever describe. Honestly, I appreciate that. All right. The last one. I don't know why I'm looking at my phone like I don't know. This is the easiest one. I have this thing I call the "Don't Kill Yourself" list. I started it for myself when I was in a really dark time in my life.
Yeah.
It always starts with coffee sandwiches and lavender soap, but they're like things that are accessible, that are like delightful, usually sensual for me, but they can be more abstract. And I just like, please add something to the "Don't Kill Yourself" list. A reason. Objective to your experience, reasons to stay alive,
Yeah, man. I guess this is kind of like things that I look forward to, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think for me it's like and I've never gotten to talk to like someone who works in the field about this. Like we were talking about this whole long discussion of it's very hard to actually get help. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of things.
Yeah, it is.
Sometimes for me it just helped to have like these little footholds, these little things, and I almost as a meditative practice I'd be like. Yes, I use incense now sometimes. Just like the lavender soap and coffee every day. And those are undeniable realities for me.
So look, like as a true therapist, I'm gonna like tack a little bit away from myself and talk about.
That's fine.
So like one of the things we encourage people to do in DBT is to create a distress tolerance toolkit, which you put all the things in that like make you feel good. So. I'm listening to Rosalia, who's like a nuevo flamenco singer right now. She won the Latin Grammy last year. Oh my God. Well, I'll play a song for you. Like,
okay.
She's fucking incredible.
Yeah.
So like that music is a big one for me. Like if I just put on music that will help me. Coffee is another one. It's like I go to sleep like thinking about the smell of that in the morning.
Right? It's like a reason to go to bed. So you
Dude, a super hot long shower. I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are... And like a really good workout that.
What's your favorite? Like, what's your go-to workouts kind of things these days? Because we met was CrossFit-y.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do like just because I have injuries to manage,
Me too.
so I kind of like do my own.
I think CrossFit will hurt everybody eventually.
Yeah. I mean, it can be great for people. But
I think CrossFit is something that you do for a while. Like you do it the way you do drugs for a while.
Dude, also, have you ever met like a competitive CrossFit athlete? Like the most boring fucking person I've ever met.
Well, I mean, and I'm not going to turn this into a shit talk CrossFit
No, you're
session.
right.
I want to because I mean, as speaking as
I
somebody,
don't want to talk shit.
speaking
It's
as
done
somebody
amazing.
certified. I was. I don't think it's good anymore.
Yeah.
But all that fucking bullshit. Yeah, most CrossFit coaches are glorified camp counselors, and and they're just like, get under it, hip drive. They're like, who don't appreciate their natural gifts and that they did college athletics and need someplace else to go now, and they're teaching people, quote unquote. Dude, I mean, I won't name names, but I remember I went to my cert, and the second day is the day of the written test, and there was somebody there who I knew from the community, whatever, who's like kind of one of those athlete celeb types, and they were kind of incognito and like had like a hat on because they needed to take that test again. And you're just like, it's not a hard test. It's not a hard test, coach. And they just didn't want anyone to know they're there. That's like CrossFit. Not to mention CrossFit's a bizarro like political stance that they take so often. It's very weird.
It's uncomfortable.
But
so it still.
But speaking more objectively, just frankly, too much internal rotation, an uneducated approach to intensity,
linear motion only. No
progression.
No. So
programming is just like, what the fuck is programming?
Yeah, I just think there's so many good resources out there that people need to be more flexible about things. But honestly, now I'm other than like popping my rib every now and then, like jiu-jitsu has been. I mean, I feel like every fucking white belt says this, but like it's totally life-changing, bro.
It fucking is, bro. It really is. I think it really is. I think it stays with you. I say this a bunch now too, that like I don't think I'm ever not doing jiu-jitsu now. Like, I think it's a part of my life and my mindset and my approach to like my mental wellness, my spiritual wellness. And even I'm realizing more and more in a literal sense, like I'll come back. I hadn't trained in like weeks really, like, you know, a while, and I can drop right back in with all the other brown belts and pearl belts and stuff, like no problem. And I think it's because I'm thinking about it a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's like nice to see that like mind physical connection, you know?
Yes, totally. I also, I mean, I still, lifting weights is like just something I hope to do forever. I find it to be like so therapeutic, and I don't know if fun's the right word. It's just like necessary for me.
Yeah. Does something.
Yeah, but there is something really cool about jiu-jitsu because it's like, all right, like who fucking cares how much weight you can lift if I can take your back and fucking choke you.
Well, I
will
will say we were talking a little bit off mic about this, about like body culture stuff, and I will say that when I'm doing jiu-jitsu or fight sports in general, actively, I feel way less bad about my body and physical sense of self and everything than I do when I'm just lifting and dieting. Do you know what I mean?
100%. Yeah. I also, again, to like
I barely think about it because I'm like, I barely think about what I look like because I'm just thinking about what I can do.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, totally. I think that's the super cool thing about it.
Yeah. I think it's actually weirdly related thematically to our whole thing about like a focus on effectiveness. Like
100%.
there's no weird subjective space of like, is this working or not? Is this good for me or not? Is this good or bad? It's like, does it work or not?
Dude, yeah. I mean, like, it doesn't matter what I look like when I just got tapped by that skinny guy and I just got tapped by that fat guy.
Yeah.
Who, you know, like,
I think that's a really beautiful experience too of like,
it is.
There's like a Joe Rogan clip or something somewhere, but he is right that like the idea of getting in a fight also is just the stupidest fucking thing. And you only have to spend like a week in combat sports to realize you can't assess anyone from what they look like.
You can't.
Like you'll meet these people who just look like little dweebs and they will beat the life out of you and you will never get good enough to stop them. You know what I mean? Like some people are just natural
savages,
but just combatants. It's weird. It makes me feel like there really is like classes in a RPG. Like, you know what I mean? Like some people were just born barbarians and some people were born shamans and some people were born mages, and that's how it is.
That's how it is. Yeah. No, it is really funny. That's true.
Thanks, man. This has been one of my favorite ones to do in a while.
Oh, I really appreciate it.
Do you want to say maybe find you anywhere? You want to be anywhere public?
Oh, I mean, I don't really know. Like if anyone has a question or they want to talk about this stuff, I also am happy to like help people find resources, like if they're going through it. So they could get me at drnicholasbarr@gmail.com. But
that's very nice of you. Cool.
Yeah, that's my professional but not work email.
Cool.
I don't really have like
CH?
NICHOLAS.
Cool.
Yeah, BARR.
Killer, dude. Oh, that's weird. The double R thing.
Yeah, like Roseanne, but not related. Yeah.
Well, okay. That's good.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I really appreciate it. I think this has been one of my favorite ones in a while. I think this is really helpful.
Yeah, it was really fun.
I seriously feel like I haven't had really repeat guests, but I feel like we could do like recurring segments with Dr. Nick.
Anytime, man.
All right.
I loved it.
Dude, thanks. All right. Talk to you guys later. Be well. Bye. That was my good bad brain. Thanks for listening, guys and gals and every other identifying thing in between. If you like us, check us out at patreon.com/mygoodbadbrain. It's just a way to give money to the pod. There's not like any sort of exclusive stuff going on right there right now, but it does support it and keep it going. Also, review us if you like it, you know?